The Miami sun, a relentless, unforgiving beast, beat down on my beat-up car as I pulled into the employee parking lot at Sunset Cove Water Park. My ancient AC had given up the ghost weeks ago, and I was already slick with sweat, my t-shirt clinging uncomfortably to my skin even before I cut the engine. I needed the money. I kept telling myself the mantra, a desperate whisper in the suffocating heat. Junior year of college loomed a financial black hole, and the online job listing had promised competitive pay for lifeguards. Broke and desperate, I couldn't afford to be picky. My swim team experience, 4 years of grueling practices and chlorine-soaked days made me qualified, at least on paper. A flimsy shield against the gnawing anxiety in my gut. I grabbed my backpack, the worn straps digging into my shoulder, and locked the car, the click of the door echoing unnaturally in the silent lot. The park wasn't open to the public yet, a vast empty expanse of concrete and dormant slides. I checked my watch, 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes early for my 8:30 meeting with the manager. Good start. I thought a hollow attempt at self-reassurance. As I approached the staff entrance, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt emblazoned with the Sunset Cove logo waved me over. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent far too many years under the relentless Florida sun, his skin a roadmap of sun-baked lines. "Michael Reynolds," he asked, his voice a low rumble. "That's me," I said, extending my hand, trying to project an air of confidence I didn't feel. "Everyone calls me Mike." His handshake was firm, almost crushing. "Robert Martinez, park manager. Glad to have you on board. Your swimming credentials are impressive. 4 years on your college team. Yeah, though I'm taking a break this year to focus on classes." I mumbled, already feeling the weight of the lie. Robert nodded, his gaze unwavering, and began leading me through the empty park. The place was eerily quiet without visitors, just the low hum of pumps and the distant rhythmic gurgle of water flowing through unseen pipes. We passed the wave pool, its surface still and glassy, a lazy river, winding like a forgotten serpent, and several twisting slides that rose up overhead, their vibrant colors muted by the morning light. "We run a tight ship here," Robert said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Safety is our priority. We haven't had a major incident in years, and I'd like to keep it that way." The way he emphasized major incident sent a prickle of unease down my spine. It wasn't just a casual statement. It was a warning heavy with unspoken history. I didn't ask, though 1,000 questions screamed in my head. Instead, I nodded, trying to look appropriately serious about water safety, my face a mask of professional attentiveness. Robert stopped at a door marked "Staff Only" and swiped his keycard. The lock clicked with a sharp metallic sound. "This is our break room and locker area. You'll meet John Sullivan inside. He's been with us for, well, longer than anyone. He'll show you the ropes and go over some specific procedures we have here at Sunset Cove." The break room was small but clean, with a mini fridge, a microwave, and a few tables. A man sat at one of them, staring into a cup of coffee steam, curling lazily from the rim. He looked up when we entered. "John, this is Michael, our new lifeguard." Michael John Sullivan. John didn't smile. He didn't stand. He just looked at me with eyes that were very alert and watchful for someone sitting in a break room. His skin was rough and weathered, a testament to years spent under the harsh Florida sun. He looked to be in his late 40s, but there was a coiled energy about him, a quickness in his movements, like someone much younger when he finally pushed himself up from the table. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted," Robert said, already backing toward the door. "John will go over everything you need to know." He gave John a nod, a gesture that seemed loaded with unspoken meaning, before disappearing, the door clicking shut behind him. For a moment, John and I just stood there in awkward silence. The air in the small room felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. I was about to make a joke about the weather, anything to break the tension, when he spoke. "You swim competitively." It wasn't a question, more a statement, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "Yeah, 4 years in college. That's good. You'll need to be strong." He picked up a red folder from the table, its edges worn. "Your uniform and rotation schedule are in here. First shift starts at the wave pool noon to 4, but before that..." John reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it on the table, the creases stark against the worn surface, and pushed it toward me. "These are the rules. Learn them." I looked down at the handwritten list. The ink was faded in places, as if it had been handled countless times. Stay in your chair during drownings until backup arrives. If you see a woman behind the maintenance shed after hours, ignore her. If a man waves to you from the deep end of the pool, wave back exactly once. Never open or use the blue locker in the staff locker room. Alert me immediately if fog appears over any water, regardless of weather. I read the list twice, my eyes scanning each line, waiting for John to crack a smile to say it was a joke, a new employee hazing ritual. He didn't. His face stayed completely serious, his eyes fixed on mine. Is this some kind of hazing thing for new employees? I asked, a nervous laugh bubbling up thin and reedy in the quiet room. John's expression didn't change. Follow these rules or you'll die. The bluntness of his statement caught me off guard. No, you might get fired. No, it's for your safety. Just a stark chilling. You'll die. Okay, sure, I said, trying to play along, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy atmosphere. Stay in the chair. Avoid creepy women, wave at pool men, no blue locker, watch for spooky fog. Got it. This isn't a joke, Michael. His voice had dropped lower, a dangerous edge to it. These rules keep people alive. I nodded, not sure what else to do. Clearly this guy took whatever weird tradition this was very seriously. Maybe it was some elaborate prank the staff played on newcomers, a way to test their mettle. I'd go along with it for now. I understand, I said, trying to sound sincere. John studied my face for a moment, his gaze piercing, then seemed satisfied. Get changed. I'll show you around before your shift starts. The locker room was standard rows of metal lockers, showers, bathroom stalls. John pointed me to an empty locker where I could store my things. You can use any unclaimed locker except the blue one. I know. I finished for him, still thinking this was all some weird game. As I changed into the red shorts and tank top with lifeguard printed across the chest, John waited by the door. He seemed tense, his eyes always moving, checking corners and shadows as if expecting something to emerge from the dimness. The tour of the park was thorough but strange. John didn't just show me where everything was. He showed me exactly where to watch, how to keep my eyes on the water, and which paths to take between stations. He went over the safety rules with a seriousness that seemed over the top for a pool job. Always scan the bottom of the pool every 30 seconds, he said as we stood by the edge of the main pool, its depth shimmering under the morning sun. Count the people in your zone when you start your shift, then count again every 5 minutes. Standard lifeguard procedure, but the way he said it, the intensity in his eyes made it sound like a sacred special routine. By the time noon rolled around, I was starting to wonder if I'd made a mistake taking this job. But the thought of my empty bank account, the looming tuition bills, kept me climbing up to the high chair overlooking the wave pool. As guests began packing into the park, their excited shouts and laughter filling the air, the first few hours of my shift were normal enough. Kids splashing, teenagers showing off, parents trying to relax while keeping an eye on their children. I stayed alert, blew my whistle a few times at runners, and helped a lost child find his mother. But then I noticed John. He wasn't sitting in his chair by the deep end of the main pool. He was standing beside it, his posture, stiff eyes, always looking at the water. Not just casually watching, but staring with such focus, such intensity. It was like he expected something to come up from the bottom at any moment. He hardly blinked. When my break finally came, a welcome reprieve from the relentless sun and the constant vigilance, I headed to the staff room. Inside, I met a few other lifeguards. They seemed normal enough, chatting about annoying guests, upcoming shifts, and the usual mundane complaints of a summer job. I wanted to ask about John, about his strange rules, about the unsettling feeling that clung to this place like the humidity. But something stopped me. A flicker of fear. A sense that speaking about it might break some invisible barrier, might invite something unwelcome. Instead, I ate my sandwich in silence, listening to their conversations, trying to catch any hint that they found the place as weird as I was beginning to think it was. Nothing. Their chatter was light, oblivious, light. The rest of my shift was quiet, the afternoon sun slowly dipping towards the horizon. As closing time approached, the number of guests dwindled, their laughter replaced by the distant hum of the park's machinery. The announcement for final swim came over the loudspeakers, echoing across the emptying pools. And 30 minutes later, the park was deserted, except for staff. I was helping clean up some stray trash near the snack bar when I noticed John making his rounds. But they weren't casual walks around the park. They were careful, thorough checks of every pool, every water feature. He would stop at specific points, stare into the water for exactly the same amount of time, then move to the next spot. It looked less like an end-of-day inspection and more like some kind of strange, ritualistic routine. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, his eyes never leaving the water. When I finished my duties, a growing sense of unease prickling at my skin, I headed back to the locker room to change. That's when I saw it. The blue locker. Somehow I'd missed it earlier, lost in the chaos of my first day. While all the other lockers were a standard dull gray metal, this one was painted a deep, almost unnatural blue. And now that I was alone in the room, the silence pressing in, I noticed something else. Faint dark stains around its edges, like something had leaked out and been quickly, frantically cleaned up. Rule 4. Never open or use the blue locker in the staff locker room. Suddenly felt less like a joke, less like a hazing prank. That locker gave me the creeps. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I changed quickly, my back to it, unable to shake the feeling that something inside might be listening, waiting. Every rustle of my clothes, every creak of the metal sounded amplified in the quiet room. I felt a pair of unseen eyes on me, a chilling presence just beyond my line of sight. As I walked to my car in the evening light, the last rays of sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I couldn't help glancing back at the main pool still visible through the fence. The water should have been still placid with the pumps turned off for the night. It wasn't. Across the surface, a ripple moved from one end to the other, a slow, deliberate disturbance, as if something had just passed beneath. Something big. I stood frozen, watching my breath caught in my throat until the water went still again. Then I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away much faster than the parking lot speed limit allowed. Maybe it was just the wind, I told myself. Maybe a pump was still running. But I knew better. And suddenly John's rules didn't seem like hazing anymore. I spent the night trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw in that pool. The ripple could have been anything, a leaf blown across the surface, a pump still running, maybe even my imagination after a long, strange first day. But no matter how I rationalized it, I kept circling back to John's rules and his deadly serious warning. I barely slept. The next day at the park was busy enough to keep my mind occupied, but I found myself watching John more closely. The way he walked the deck, eyes always looking around the water, stopping at exact spots to stare at certain areas. It wasn't normal lifeguard behavior. Not even close. 2 days after receiving those strange rules, I was stationed at the lazy river, sitting in the high chair that gave me a clear view of the winding artificial waterway. The summer heat beat down hard and the water shined under the midday sun as guests floated by on colorful tubes. I kept checking left to right, top to bottom, watching for any signs of trouble. That's when I noticed her. A small girl, maybe 8 years old, who had somehow slipped off her tube in the deeper section where the river curved behind a rock formation. Her head bobbed up once, arms waving wildly before she went under again. My body tensed, ready to jump. I'd done dozens of water rescues during my time on the swim team. But then John's first rule flashed in my mind. Stay in your chair during drownings until backup arrives. Everything in my training screamed against it. Every instinct told me to dive in. My hand closed around my whistle, ready to blow the emergency signal when something caught my eye. John was already in the water. He moved through the current with impossible speed, reaching the girl in seconds. The thing was, I'd seen him not 30 seconds earlier on the opposite side of the park, checking chlorine levels at the wave pool. There was no way he could have made it across the park that quickly, let alone spotted the drowning child from that distance. But there he was, lifting the girl's head above water, securing her small body against his chest, as he swam one arm to the edge. A woman, presumably the girl's mother, was already running along the concrete, her face showing pure panic.
Lily!
She screamed, reaching for her daughter as John handed the coughing, sputtering child up to waiting hands. She's okay, John assured the mother, his voice calm and steady. Just swallowed some water. Have the first aid station check her, but she'll be fine. The woman clutched her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, oh God, thank you, I only looked away for a second. It happens, John said, pulling himself out of the water. She's safe now. As the mother carried her daughter toward the first aid station, guests around the lazy river were already returning to their tubes and floats, the brief emergency already fading from their minds. I climbed down from my chair once my replacement arrived for my scheduled break. John was toweling off nearby, seemingly unfazed by what had just happened. How did you get to her so fast? I asked, keeping my voice low. You were at the wave pool. John looked at me, water still dripping from his leathery skin. You stayed in your chair. Good, but I was going to call for backup. She was drowning. Rule 1 exists for a reason, he said, draping the towel around his neck. What would have happened if we both left our posts? Who would be watching the water? It made sense from a safety protocol standpoint, but it didn't explain how he'd moved across the park so quickly, or how he'd even seen the girl in trouble from that distance. I was going to blow my whistle, I said. Next time, do that first. But always stay in your chair until someone comes. He turned to walk away, then paused. You're on closing shift tonight. I nodded. Remember the rules, he said, his voice dropping lower. All of them. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. As evening approached, the crowds thinned, families packing up towels and sunscreen heading for the exits. The park closed at 8:00 p.m., but employees stayed until 9:00 to clean and prepare for the next day. Darkness settled over Sunset Cove as I made my rounds, checking for lost items and making sure no guests had stayed behind. The underwater lights in the pools cast an eerie blue glow across the deck. Without the screams of children and the constant splashing, the park took on a completely different atmosphere, quiet, watchful waiting. I was near the competition pool when I heard it. A woman's voice, soft but clear in the evening stillness. Help me, please. Someone. I turned toward the sound. It seemed to be coming from behind the maintenance shed, a small building tucked between the slides and the fence marking the park boundary. Is someone there? I called out, already walking in that direction. The park is closed. Please, I'm hurt. As I rounded the corner of the shed, I saw her. A woman in a white bathing suit, standing with her back partially turned toward me. Long, wet hair hung down, hiding her face. Water pooled at her feet while the concrete around her was completely dry. Rule 2 popped into my mind. If you see a woman behind the maintenance shed after hours, ignore her. I stopped cold. Every instinct told me to help someone in distress. But John's warning, follow these rules or you'll die, stuck in my head, a chilling echo. I need help, the woman said, her voice somehow both distant and too close. She began to turn toward me, wet hair still covering her face. Please don't leave me alone. It took everything I had to turn my back on her. Every step away felt wrong on a fundamental level. Why won't you help me? Her voice changed, taking on a desperate, almost guttural edge. I know you can hear me. I kept walking, my heart pounding in my chest. Don't leave me here. The scream that followed didn't sound fully human. It was too raw, too hollow, like it was coming from somewhere deep underwater. I walked faster, fighting the urge to run, to look back. The woman's pleas turned to sobbing, then to something that sounded like pure, unadulterated rage. Just as I reached the main pool deck, the sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was almost worse. You did well. I nearly jumped out of my skin. John stood a few feet away, watching me with those two alert eyes. Jesus, you scared me. But you followed the rule, he said with a nod of approval. Despite what you were feeling. That woman? I glanced back toward the maintenance shed. Shouldn't we check if she's okay? She's not real. Not anymore. John's gaze followed mine, his expression grim. Whatever she is, she's been here since before I started. A chill ran through me despite the warm night air. What do you mean, not real? Some things look human but aren't. That's all you need to know for now. He shifted his focus back to me. The rules keep you safe from things most people never have to see. I wanted to ask more questions, but something in John's face told me I wouldn't get straight answers. Instead, I helped finish the closing tasks, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me from every shadow. When I finally got home that night, I couldn't forget the image of the woman in white, or John's unclear explanation. I was at my laptop typing Sunset Cove Water Park History into the search bar. Most results were just ads and reviews, but on page 3, I found a link to an old newspaper archive. The article from 1978 described the park's construction. Local businessman William Sullivan breaks ground on new water attraction. There were concerns about building over the natural sinkhole that took 3 lives earlier this decade. I clicked through to related articles, finding brief mentions of 3 separate drowning incidents in 1975 and 1976 before the land was developed. 2 young men and a woman had drowned in the waters that had filled the sinkhole after heavy rains. The woman's name was Claire Mitchell. She was 23 years old when she drowned. The article mentioned she was last seen wearing a white swimsuit. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of my apartment. Sleep seemed impossible now. What had I gotten myself into? More importantly, what was I going to do about it? Quitting seemed like the obvious answer, but something told me it wouldn't be that simple. As I lay in bed, I kept seeing the pale woman behind the maintenance shed, hearing her inhuman scream. And underneath it all was the question I couldn't shake. How had John moved across the entire park in seconds to save that little girl? A week into working at Sunset Cove had changed me. I'd gone from laughing off John's rules to jumping at shadows and researching drownings from the 1970s. Meeting that woman in white, hearing that sound, it had really freaked me out. But like any broke college student who needed money, I kept showing up for my shifts. The Tuesday afternoon sun was hot on my shoulders as I watched over the main pool from my lifeguard chair. The heat brought out a good crowd, families splashing in the shallow end, teenagers showing off on the diving board, and a few adults swimming laps in their lanes. Just normal summer stuff at what seemed like a normal water park. I'd been looking back and forth across my zone just like John taught me, left to right, top to bottom, checking the pool floor, then the surface, then the deck. The pattern had almost become a hypnotic, almost relaxing rhythm. That's when I noticed something weird in the deep end. The water was moving strangely. Not from swimmers, not from the filters, but from below. Circles slow and deliberate, spreading out from a spot where nobody was swimming. None of the guests seemed to notice. They kept splashing and laughing, oblivious, not seeing what was happening just feet away. I leaned forward in my chair, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrests, trying to see better through the sun's reflection on the water. The circles got bigger, wider, pushing the surface into unnatural undulations. And then I saw it. A dark shape, indistinct at first, coming up slowly from the bottom of the pool. My throat went dry. I grabbed the arms of my chair, my muscles tensed, ready to blow my whistle, ready to scream when the shape came close to the surface. It looked like a man, with really pale, almost translucent skin floating straight up and down in the water, his head tilted slightly. As I watched, unable to move, unable to tear my eyes away, he rose until his head and shoulders came out of the water. His hair, dark and slick, clung to his scalp. His eyes, though, were the most unsettling part. Wide, unblinking, and a milky, opaque white like cataracts. He raised his hand in a wave, slow and deliberate, water running down his arm in rivulets that seemed to cling to his skin. Rule 3 popped into my head, a sudden jarring clarity amidst the rising panic. If a man waves to you from the deep end of the pool, wave back exactly once. My hand felt heavy, reluctant, but a primal fear, a desperate need to follow the unspoken command, forced it up. I raised my hand and waved back just once, a stiff, unnatural movement like I was supposed to. The pale man stayed there for a moment, water splashing softly around his shoulders. His face, though human in outline, looked weirdly unclear, as if viewed through rippling heat haze, or perhaps as if it wasn't quite solid. Then slowly he began to sink back down. The water closed over his head, the circles slowly stopped, and the pool went back to normal, its surface once again reflecting the bright, innocent sky. I sat stiff in my chair, sweating, and it wasn't just from the heat. Had anyone else seen it? I looked around at the guests, their faces carefree, their laughter echoing. But everyone just kept doing what they were doing, splashing and playing, with no idea what had just happened in the deep end. The sheer normalcy of their reactions was almost as terrifying as the encounter itself. When my replacement came for my break, a guy named Drew, who'd started a few days before me, I climbed down from the chair on wobbly legs. "You okay?" Drew asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Just the heat," I mumbled, not trusting myself to say more, not trusting my voice to be steady. In the break room, I found Emily eating a sandwich at one of the tables. She'd been working at Sunset Cove for 3 summers now, according to what I'd overheard. If anyone besides John knew what was going on, it would be her. I grabbed my lunch from the fridge and sat across from her. For a minute, I just ate in silence, the food tasteless in my mouth, trying to find the right words. "Hey, Emily," I finally said, keeping my voice low despite us being alone. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up, weariness immediately crossing her face, a subtle shift in her eyes. "Depends on what it is. Have you ever seen anything strange in the water? Things that shouldn't be there?" Emily's expression closed off completely. She set down her sandwich, her movements slow and deliberate, and looked toward the door as if checking whether anyone might walk in. "You've been talking to John," she said, not a question, but a flat statement of fact. "He gave me the rules on my first day." She nodded slightly. "Good, listen to him." "But what are these things, the woman behind the shed, the man in the pool?" "Stop!" Emily cut me off, her voice sharp, a sudden intensity in her eyes. "Just follow John's rules," she whispered, leaning closer, her voice barely audible. "That's how you survive here. So you've seen them too." She didn't confirm or deny it, but the look in her eyes told me everything. Emily had seen things, maybe worse than what I'd encountered so far. 3 summers. 3 summers. I repeated the words, tasting like ash. "How have you lasted that long?" "I pay attention. I do exactly what John says." She gathered the remains of her lunch, her movements stiff. "You should too if you want to make it through the season." As she stood to leave, I asked one more question, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "What happens if you break the rules?" Emily paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She didn't turn around. "Ask Robert about last summer's staff." Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me alone in the break room. My appetite was gone. Through the small window, I could see John walking around, stopping here and there to look into each pool. What did he see that the rest of us missed? With 20 minutes left in my break, curiosity got the better of me. The door to Robert's office was open, but he wasn't inside. On a hunch, I checked the filing cabinet in the corner. The top drawer was unlocked. Employee files inside. I thumbed through the folders quickly, looking at dates: current season, last season, the season before that. I pulled out the file for last summer and spread the papers on Robert's desk. The staff roster showed 15 lifeguards at the start of the season. By August, only 7 remained. Next to the names of those who'd left were brief notes: resigned, personal reasons, terminated, rule violation, terminated, unauthorized access. 2 files were marked simply as status unknown, with strange symbols drawn in red ink at the bottom of the page. I flipped through more records, a chilling pattern emerging. Every summer, Sunset Cove lost nearly half its staff before the season ended. Way too many people quit, even for a summer job. Some personnel files had those same red symbols marked on them. They looked like nothing I'd ever seen. Not letters or numbers, but weird, intricate shapes that were hard to look at for long, as if they shifted slightly at the edge of my vision. The sound of footsteps in the hallway sent me scrambling to return the files to the cabinet. I had just closed the drawer when Robert appeared in the doorway. "Michael," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing in here?" "Sorry," I said, hoping I didn't look as guilty as I felt. The door was open. I was looking for the sunscreen we keep for guests. Someone asked for some at my station. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded toward a cabinet on the other wall. "Top shelf. Make sure you get back to your post on time." "Will do," I said, grabbing a bottle of sunscreen as cover, before heading out for the rest of my shift. I couldn't stop thinking about those files and the strange symbols. Every time I looked at the deep end of the pool, I half expected to see the pale man rising again. As the day ended and guests began to leave, I noticed Robert watching me from the office window several times throughout the afternoon. I caught him giving me concerned looks. It was making me nervous. During closing procedures, as I was cleaning up some trash near the snack bar, Robert approached me. "How are you settling in, Michael?" He asked, his tone casual, but his eyes watchful. "Fine," I said. "Everyone's been helpful." Robert nodded, looking out over the now empty pools. "John tells me you've been following the protocols well." I knew he wasn't talking about standard lifeguard procedures. "I'm trying to." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "We lost 3 lifeguards last summer. They either quit without notice or..." He trailed off. "Or what?" I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. Robert's expression tightened. "Or they disappeared. One day here, the next gone. No calls, no texts. Personal items still in their lockers. What happened to them?" "They broke the rules," he said simply. Then, seeing my reaction, he added, "John knows what he's doing. Without him, we'd all be gone. This place, it needs someone like him." "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What's really going on here?" Robert checked his watch, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "Ask John if you want details. Just know that following his instructions isn't optional. It's survival." He left, then leaving me with more questions than answers. As I finished my closing duties, I looked around for John, but he seemed to have disappeared after his final rounds. The sun was setting as I walked to my car. I kept thinking about what Robert had said. People had disappeared here. Not just quit, but vanished. And everyone talked about it like it was normal. Expected, even. I was halfway home when I stopped at a red light near the beach access road. As I waited for the light to change, something on the street corner caught my eye. A figure in white. My blood went cold. It was her. The woman from behind the maintenance shed. She stood perfectly still amid the moving pedestrians, her long wet hair partially obscuring her face. Even from this distance, I could see water pooling at her feet. I blinked and she was gone. The car behind me honked as the light turned green. I drove on, gripping the steering wheel tightly. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The pale man in the pool. The woman in white now appearing outside the park. It was as if they were following me, learning about me. I thought about quitting. I should quit. Any sane person would walk away from whatever was happening at Sunset Cove. But as I stared at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't. Something about that place had its hooks in me now. Whether it was curiosity or something darker, I felt trapped. Not just by my need for the paycheck, but by a growing obsession with understanding what lurked beneath the surface of those pools. I'd survived a week following John's rules, but how much longer could my luck hold out? And what would happen when the entities decided that simply watching me wasn't enough? 3 weeks into my job at Sunset Cove Water Park, I was getting used to the weird routine. Watching the water, helping lost kids find their parents, and following John's mysterious rules that somehow kept me alive. I'd seen the woman in white and the man who waved from the deep end. I'd done my research on the park's dark history, piecing together fragments of forgotten tragedies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened next. I pulled into the employee parking lot that morning, the familiar crunch of gravel under my tires, and immediately noticed something wrong. 4 police cars were at the main entrance, their lights flashing, painting the early morning gloom with strobing red and blue. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a lost child or a minor incident. This was serious. I felt nervous as I parked and rushed toward the staff entrance. Small groups of employees stood together talking quietly, their faces grim. Robert was by the gate talking to 2 officers, his usual stern demeanor replaced by a worried, almost frantic expression. Before I could get close enough to hear what they were saying, John materialized beside me. He moved with that unsettling quietness, like a shadow detaching itself from the darkness. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the words catching in my throat. John looked toward the officers, then back at me, his eyes holding a familiar, chilling intensity. "Drew didn't go home last night. His roommate called it in." Drew. The part-time lifeguard who'd started a few days before me. Nice kid, always joking around in the break room. I'd covered his station a few times when he needed a break. A sudden, sickening thought hit me. "Did you tell him about the rules?" John asked, suddenly his voice dropping low, a dangerous rumble. I shook my head, a wave of guilt washing over me. "No, I didn't think." John's face darkened, a grim mask. "He went into the blue locker. Nothing left of him now." I felt cold, a deep, bone-chilling cold, even though the morning air was already thick with heat. "How do you know?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely audible. "The locker. The locker was open this morning." John said, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond me. "And there's always residue." He didn't explain further, and in that moment I wasn't sure I wanted him to. The image of those faint, dark stains around the blue locker's edges flashed in my mind, now imbued with a horrifying new meaning. Robert finished with the police and called us together, his voice strained. He explained that Drew hadn't returned home after his closing shift, and that officers would be checking the premises. We would open as scheduled, but some areas might be temporarily closed for the investigation. As everyone headed to their stations, a somber, unspoken dread hanging in the air, John grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Be extra careful today," he warned, his voice low, urgent. "When something like this happens, the others get excited." "The others?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The woman in white, the man in the pool." John nodded, once a curt, grim confirmation. "And worse things. They smell death." He left before I could ask anything else, leaving me with the awful, vivid picture of Drew alone in the locker room after everyone had gone home, his curiosity getting the better of him opening that blue locker. What had happened to him? What was inside that thing? The morning went by in a rush of whistles and putting sunscreen on kids. I was working at the wave pool watching families splash and scream as the fake waves came in every 15 minutes. But I couldn't stop thinking about Drew, about John's chilling words. Every time a wave crashed, I imagined something else rising from the depths. After lunch, I switched to the kiddie pool, a shallow, colorful area with tiny slides and water sprays. It was usually an easy spot. Parents stayed close to their toddlers and the water barely reached the kids' knees. I sat in the chair looking over the water like John had taught me, my eyes scanning the surface, the bottom, the edges. That's when I saw it. Small strips of mist showing up just above the water. Not steam. The water wasn't heated, but thin, ethereal curls of fog coming from the shallow pool itself. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks, that the sun was affecting my vision. But the mist was definitely there, getting thicker each second, spreading slowly, insidiously. Rule 5 hit me like a physical blow. Alert John immediately if fog appears over any water. My hand shot to the radio clipped to my shorts. "John, it's Michael. There's fog over the kiddie pool." The radio buzzed for a second. A crackle of static before John's voice came through, tense and quick. "Don't move. I'm coming." Within moments, John was running across the deck, moving faster than seemed possible for a man his age, a blur of red and tanned skin. When he saw the mist now making a thick, swirling layer over the kiddie pool, he yelled to the nearest staff, his voice booming with an authority I hadn't heard before. "Full evacuation now." Robert appeared beside him, seemingly out of nowhere, took one look at the fog, and grabbed the microphone for the PA system. His voice boomed across the park, amplified and distorted. "Attention all guests. Due to an unexpected maintenance issue, Sunset Cove, water park is closing immediately. Please make your way calmly to the exits where you will receive a full refund or rain check." Other lifeguards, their faces pale with confusion and alarm, began helping guests out of the pools and toward the exits. Parents grabbed confused children, teenagers complained, but everyone moved, a tide of humanity flowing towards the gates. I stood from my chair ready to help, but John grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Stay with me," he ordered, his eyes locked on mine. "We need to contain it." The mist was spreading fast now, not just over the kiddie pool, but stretching toward the larger pools and water features. Within minutes, thick, swirling fog covered the entire aquatic area, cutting visibility to just a few feet. The air turned cold, a sudden, unnatural chill that raised goosebumps on my arms and legs, even in the summer heat. Through the swirling fog, I saw things moving. Tall, thin shadows sliding silently between the pools. They moved in a strange, disjointed way, leaving no footprints on the wet concrete. "What are those?" I whispered, pointing, my voice trembling. John didn't look. "Don't acknowledge them. Don't speak to them. Don't even look at them directly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that caught the dim, diffused light, a small, flat metal disc covered with symbols similar to those I had seen in the employee files and on John's arm. He pressed it into my palm. "Hold this until the fog clears," he said, his voice urgent. "Don't let go of it no matter what you see or hear." The amulet was warm on my skin, and it seemed to buzz with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. John pulled out another one for himself, then started walking a specific, deliberate pattern around the pool deck, stopping at certain spots to say words I couldn't understand, words that sounded ancient and guttural. I stayed close behind him, holding the amulet tightly, my eyes darting through the swirling mist. The shapes in the fog grew more numerous and bolder. They moved around us, just out of clear sight, looking strange and wrong, like their arms were too long, and they bent in ways they shouldn't. Strange sounds filled the air. Not quite words, but sounds that almost made sense, like a language I'd forgotten, a whisper from the edge of sanity. One shape came closer than the others, its top part tilting as if it was looking at us, assessing. John stepped between it and me, holding up his amulet. The shape recoiled, moving back, sliding into the thickest part of the fog. We kept walking this weird route for what felt like hours, John following his path while I stayed behind him, holding the amulet. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the fog started to clear. The shapes backed away, retreating into the receding mist. The strange sounds stopped, and it got warmer, the summer heat slowly returning. By late afternoon, the fog was completely gone, leaving the pools as calm and innocent as ever. John took back the amulet, looking extremely tired, lines of exhaustion etched deep into his face. It's over for now. What was that? I asked, my voice hoarse. What were those things in the fog? The less you know about them, the safer you are, he said, putting both amulets in his pocket. Check the pool edges. There will be marks. Sure enough, when I looked closely at the concrete edges of the pools, I found long, shallow scratch marks. 3 parallel lines too evenly spaced to be random, too deep to be made by human nails. They circled each pool, as if something had been trying to claw its way out of the water. Robert announced over the PA system that the park would reopen. Guests who had stayed for their rain checks began coming back in, completely unaware of what had just happened. The other lifeguards returned to their posts, many looking shaken but saying nothing about the evacuation or the fog. During my break, I found Emily in the staff room staring at her untouched lunch. You've seen it before, haven't you? I asked, sitting across from her. The fog. She nodded slowly. Twice. Once my first summer, once last year. Her voice was flat, empty. It's always the same. The fog comes. Those things appear. John walks his pattern. What are they? Emily shrugged, a weary, defeated gesture. John never says exactly. Just that they want to get out. Out of what? The water. Out of wherever they're trapped. She looked up at me, then her eyes haunted. I've worked here 3 summers, and I've only survived because of John. He's more than a lifeguard, she explained, her voice barely a whisper. He's a guardian. Guardian of what? Emily looked around, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. This place isn't just a water park. It's a prison, or a gateway, or something. John keeps whatever's on the other side from getting through. After my shift ended, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the county library, wanting to find out more about Sunset Cove and John's family. The old librarian helped me access their digital newspaper archives, and I looked for articles about the park's development. Most were basic business stories, groundbreaking ceremonies, opening day celebrations, economic impact reports. But one article from 1978 caught my eye. Sullivan Water Park opens despite local opposition. The piece quoted several community members who opposed the park's construction, citing concerns about the land's history. One local historian claimed William Sullivan, the developer, and John's grandfather had made unorthodox arrangements to secure the property and permits. I kept digging and found an obscure weekly paper that had published a series of investigative articles about the park's construction. The reporter had interviewed former workers who talked about weird things at the building site, tools that moved overnight, unexplained cold spots, and strange sounds coming from the natural sinkhole that would later become the main pool. The most disturbing article talked about 3 construction workers who disappeared during a single week in 1977. The men had been working on the plumbing system that connected water to and from the sinkhole. They had reportedly complained about something moving in the water days before they vanished. The case was never solved. In a follow-up piece, the reporter hinted at occult arrangements made by William Sullivan to ensure the park's success, though no specific accusations were made. The reporter tried to interview Sullivan about these claims but was turned away. Shortly after, the series of articles stopped abruptly with no explanation. I sat back in my chair, trying to make sense of what I had read. John wasn't just enforcing random rules. He was containing whatever his grandfather had unleashed during the park's construction. The blue locker, the woman in white, the man in the pool, the shadows in the fog, all connected to William Sullivan's occult arrangements. And now Drew was gone, just like those construction workers decades ago. Was anything left of him, or had he simply vanished, another sacrifice to whatever was hiding beneath Sunset Cove? As I drove home that night, the images from the newspaper articles swirling in my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about those scratch marks around the pools, or the tall shadows moving through the fog. For 3 weeks, I'd been swimming in those same waters, watching over children playing in them all, while something waited beneath the surface. I thought about quitting, just walking away from Sunset Cove and never coming back. But somehow, I knew it wasn't that simple. As Emily had said, John was a guardian. And now I understood what he was protecting us from. The question was, could he contain it forever? And what would happen to all of us if he failed? I cursed under my breath as I drove back towards Sunset Cove Water Park. After a month of working there, surviving supernatural encounters and learning the weird rules that kept me alive, I'd gone and made a rookie mistake, leaving my wallet in the break room. I'd already gotten home the familiar comfort of my apartment, a brief fleeting illusion when I realized it was missing. Probably fallen out of my back pocket when I changed after my shift. The thought of my ID, my cash, my bank cards sitting vulnerable in that eerie place was enough to turn my stomach. The bright Miami city lights, usually a comforting glow, now seemed to mock the empty, silent parking lot as I pulled in. The park looked different at night, more scary, stripped of the happy families and splashing kids. Just big, silent water slides looming like skeletal giants and still, dark pools waiting. The air was heavy, thick, with an unspoken presence. I used my key to enter through the service entrance, the metal door creaking like a tortured sigh as I pushed it open. The hallway lights were on their night-setting dim fluorescence, casting long, distorted shadows, giving just enough light to see by. My footsteps bounced against the concrete floor, echoing unnaturally as I made my way toward the staff area. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every distant hum of machinery sounded like a whisper. The main pool deck was almost completely dark, except for the safety lights underwater that stayed on all night. Those lights, a sickly, unnatural blue, made strange rippling patterns across the walls and ceiling, like ghostly hands reaching out. I'd walked this way dozens of times during daylight hours, but now each shadow made me tense. Each faint sound made my heart pound. Something moved. I froze my breath, catching in my throat. There was someone in the competition pool. The underwater lights showed a person swimming laps with strong, steady strokes, cutting through the water with effortless grace. I squinted, trying to make out who would be swimming at this hour, the late hour in this place. As the swimmer reached the wall nearest me and turned, I saw John's face. His features were clear in the blue glow, his eyes open, looking directly at me. He must have stayed late for some reason. Maybe this was part of his guardian duties, checking the water itself, ensuring its purity. As if noticing me, John stopped mid-lap and treaded water, looking my way. He raised his hand in a friendly wave. I paused, a strange mix of relief and unease washing over me. Relief that it was just John, unease at the sheer strangeness of him being here swimming alone in the dead of night. I remembered all the times John had warned me, saved me, guided me through all this supernatural stuff. Without him, I would have broken rules, likely disappeared like Drew. I felt a surge of gratitude, a strange, desperate bond forming in my mind. As I started walking toward the edge of the pool, raising my hand to wave back to acknowledge him, to show my thanks. Michael. A woman's voice, sharp and urgent, called my name from the direction of the locker rooms. I turned quickly, my head snapping around. She stood about 20 feet away, bathed in the dim, flickering light from the staff entrance. The woman in white. The one I'd seen behind the maintenance shed and later chillingly on the street corner. Except something was different. Her wet hair was pulled back from her face, now showing features that looked more human than I remembered. Her expression seemed concerned, even protective. "Michael, don't go to him!" She pleaded, her voice gentle, urgent, yet carrying an unsettling echo as if it came from somewhere far away. "That's not John." I froze, caught between them, a terrifying tableau. The John in the pool continued treading water, watching me, waiting for something. The woman took a cautious step forward, her bare feet making no sound on the concrete. Water pooled at her feet, even though the concrete floor was dry. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my eyes darting between the two figures. "The real danger isn't me," she insisted, taking another step closer, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "It never was. You've been told lies." My mind raced, a frantic scramble of thoughts. John had always warned me about her. Rule 2 was explicitly about ignoring any woman behind the maintenance shed. But she hadn't been behind the shed tonight. She was here in the main building. Did the rules still apply? And if that wasn't the real John in the pool? I glanced back at the pool. The man who looked like John smiled, but there was something off about it. Too wide, too fake. His eyes, still milky white, seemed to bore into me. He raised his hand to wave again, more insistently this time. A silent, chilling command. The woman was only 10 feet away now. "I've been trying to warn you," she said, her voice strained. "He's the one who takes people. He took Drew." As she came closer, I could see her face more clearly in the dim light. She looked so normal, so genuinely concerned. But as I watched, something changed. A patch of skin near her temple rippled and peeled back slightly like wet paper, revealing something gray and textured underneath. That wasn't skin at all. She didn't seem to notice it happening, her eyes still fixed on me, pleading. "Stay back," I said, taking a step backward, my voice cracking. She kept coming, her expression still concerned, still human, except for that peeling patch that was growing larger, spreading across her cheek. "Michael, please. You have to trust me. We don't have much time." Her jaw moved strangely as she spoke, as if the hinges were loosening, dislocating. Something was very, very wrong. Suddenly, someone tackled me from behind, knocking me to the ground with a jarring impact. I rolled over, ready to fight, my fists clenched, then saw it was John. The real one, not the one in the pool. He looked like he was struggling, his face contorted with effort. "Get up, run!" he shouted, pulling me to my feet with surprising strength. Behind us, the woman let out an inhuman shriek. I looked back and saw her face splitting open, the jaw dropping far lower than any human anatomy would allow, revealing rows of needle-like teeth glinting in the dim light. The skin of her face continued peeling back like wet paper, revealing the true creature beneath a grotesque, multi-limbed horror. At the same moment, the John thing in the pool rose partially out of the water. The upper body still maintained its human appearance, but below the chest, the shape bloated outward into something corpse-like and ugly, a mass of pale, decaying flesh. Its arms stretched impossibly long as it pulled itself partly onto the pool deck fingers, extending into claw-like appendages. Both creatures shrieked in unison, a coordinated hunting call that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Move!" John yelled, dragging me toward a side door I hadn't used before. We ran across the pool deck, the sound of wet, slapping footsteps close behind us, echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. John pulled me through the door, slamming it shut and jamming a mop handle through the handles. "That won't hold them long," he gasped, already moving again, pulling me down a dark maintenance corridor. "We need to get outside the main building." "What the hell were those things?" I panted, stumbling after him, my lungs burning. "They work together," John said between labored breaths, his voice strained. "Always have. One in the water, one on land. They need your permission to take you. A wave, a response, anything." We burst through another door into the staff parking area. John didn't stop until we reached my car. "Get in," he ordered, his voice sharp. "Start it up." I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. "My wallet." "Forget it," John snapped. "We need to leave now." As the engine roared to life, a sudden, terrifying silence fell. I saw some movement at the service entrance. Two figures standing side by side watching us. One was dripping wet, the other completely dry, though there was a dark, spreading puddle forming at her feet. They weren't pursuing us anymore, just watching. Their forms, though still indistinct in the dim light, radiated an ancient, malevolent patience. John got into the passenger seat. "Drive," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We need to talk." John didn't say much as I drove us away from Sunset Cove that night. He just kept looking out the rear window, watching for any sign we were being followed. I took us on a winding route through residential areas, avoiding main roads near any bodies of water. Neither of us suggested stopping anywhere. The night was full of shadows, and I didn't trust any of them. We ended up at John's small house about 2 miles inland. It was a modest single-story place with hurricane shutters and a yard that looked more practical than decorative. He invited me in, but I declined, too shaken to do anything but go home and try to process what had happened. "Meet me tomorrow at Rosie's Diner off Highway 41, he said before getting out. 9:00 a.m. I'll explain everything. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's face peeling away, revealing the thing underneath. I saw the not John rising from the pool, its body distorted and wrong. By the time my alarm went off, I'd maybe gotten 3 hours of broken sleep. Rosie's Diner was an old-school place with vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone honey. It sat almost 20 miles from Sunset Cove, which seemed intentional. John was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth far from windows or other customers. 2 coffee cups sat on the table, one in front of him and one at the empty spot across. I slid into the booth, the seat squeaking under me. John looked as tired as I felt, with dark circles under his eyes and a tight expression that showed he hadn't slept either. "You came," he said, sounding a little surprised. "You said you'd explain everything." I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, grateful for its warmth. "After what I saw last night, I need answers." The waitress came by to refill our cups and take our orders. John asked for eggs and toast. I went with pancakes. Neither of us was actually hungry, but ordering food gave us an excuse to stay. When she left, John took a long drink of his coffee and set the mug down. "What do you know about boundaries?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Like property lines." like the boundaries between worlds. He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, conspiratorial. Most places, the boundary is solid. Here and there, stay separate. But some locations, they're like thin spots in fabric. Worlds press against each other. I thought about the things I'd seen at Sunset Cove over the past month. The impossible speed, the inhuman screams, the things in the fog. And the water park is one of those places. John nodded. The original spot. The sinkhole where those people drowned in the 70s. It's a junction point, a place where our world and something else come close enough to touch. The waitress brought our food, and we stopped talking for a moment. When she left, John kept explaining as he cut up his eggs. My grandfather discovered it in the 50s. He was a developer looking for cheap land, but he was also interested in other things. Occult things. He recognized what that sinkhole was, so he built a water park on top of it. That seems like a bad idea. John pushed his eggs around his plate, not meeting my eyes. Not if your goal is containment. Water has power. It can act as a conduit or a barrier depending on how it's used. My grandfather designed the entire park as a containment system for the things in the water, and that woman. For everything that can slip through from the other side. The park man, the woman in white, they're just the most persistent. There are others. You saw some during the fog event. I hadn't touched my pancakes. The syrup was congealing around them, forming a sticky, sweet moat. What are they? I don't know what they were originally. Things that died wrong, maybe. Things that never lived in our sense of the word. They want to be here. In our world. They want bodies. Experiences. Lives. John looked up from his plate, his eyes holding a chilling intensity. They want to be real. A shiver ran through me as I remembered what John had told me about the woman behind the maintenance shed. She isn't real anymore. The rules aren't random, John continued. They're a binding contract, a set of limitations that contain their influence. As long as we follow the rules, they can only do certain things in certain ways. Break the rules and you give them permission to take you. Like Drew, I said quietly. John nodded, his expression grim. He broke Rule 4, opened the blue locker. What's in there? Nothing you want to see. John pushed his plate away, having eaten maybe 3 bites. It's a direct access point, a door that shouldn't be opened. I tried to imagine Drew's last moments alone in the locker room, curious about what was behind that blue door, maybe thinking the rules were just a prank on the new guy, opening it and finding, what, avoid a monster, or nothing at all until it was too late. Why tell employees the rules without explaining the reasons? I asked, a flicker of anger in my voice. Wouldn't people be more careful if they knew the truth? Would you have believed me on your first day? John asked, his gaze steady. If I told you about entities from another reality living in our pools, or would you have quit on the spot, or worse, stayed but thought I was crazy and ignored the rules? He had a point. I wouldn't have believed any of it without seeing it for myself, but that didn't mean the current system was working. Those symbols in the employee files, I said, a sudden realization hitting me. The ones on the status unknown cases. They match your tattoo, don't they? John's hand moved unconsciously to his left forearm, covered by his long-sleeved shirt. Yes, show me. After pausing for a second, John rolled up his sleeve. On his inner forearm was a tattoo of connected symbols, circles joined by lines, strange angular shapes and characters that didn't belong to any alphabet I knew. The design was exactly the same as the red marks I'd seen in those employee files. My grandfather designed it based on what he learned about the entities. It's a protection of sorts, and a binding. The Sullivan family mark. John rolled his sleeve back down. My father wore it. Now I do. Your father was the guardian before you. He took over when my grandfather got too old. I've been doing it since he died 15 years ago. The pieces started clicking together, forming a horrifying picture. So it's a family business, containing whatever's on the other side of that boundary. John nodded. 3 generations so far. Why not just close the park, drain the pools, tear it all down? Because the containment system is the park. The layout of the pools, the circulation system, even the height of the slides. It's all part of the design. Destroy that, and there's nothing holding them back. John's eyes met mine, deadly serious. If the park closes, they're free to go wherever they want. The reality of what he was saying sank in. Sunset Cove wasn't just a water park with a supernatural problem. It was a supernatural prison disguised as a water park. And John wasn't just a watchful lifeguard. He was the warden. That's why we reopened right after Drew disappeared. I realized. Why the park never stays closed for long after incidents. The system has to keep running. Exactly. My grandfather built it to last, but it needs maintenance. It needs guardians. John took a sip of his coffee, now cold. Which brings me to why I asked you here. You want me to quit? I guessed a flicker of hope quickly extinguished. Actually, I want you to stay. I stared at him in surprise. You've survived a month. You've seen what's really happening and you haven't run away screaming. You follow the rules. John leaned forward, his voice earnest. I need someone I can trust. Someone who understands the real job. To be what your apprentice guardian. To be my backup. I can't be everywhere at once, as last night proved. The memory of the fake John in the pool sent another chill through me. That thing looked exactly like you. They can imitate what they see. It's how they hunt. The waitress came by again, eyeing our barely touched food with concern. She offered refills on coffee, which we both accepted more out of social obligation than desire. When she left, John continued. I can arrange for a pay increase. Hazard pay, essentially. Robert knows enough to approve it without asking questions. I sat back in the booth, trying to process everything. John was offering me money to keep working at a supernatural danger zone, helping him maintain some occult containment system his grandfather had built. The practical part of me noted that extra money would help with tuition. The survival part of me screamed that I'd be insane to go back there. What if I say no? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Then you walk away. Find another summer job. Try to forget what you've seen. John's expression softened slightly. I wouldn't blame you. It's not a burden anyone should have to take on. I thought about all the people who visited Sunset Cove every day. Families with children, teenagers on dates, seniors doing water aerobics. None of them knew what was hiding beneath the surface, what swam in the water with them. They were protected by John's watchfulness and a set of rules most of them would never know existed. I also thought about the missing lifeguards from previous summers, about Drew, about how easily I could have been one of them if I hadn't followed the rules. I'm sorry, I said finally. I can't do it. John nodded, not looking surprised. I understand. I need normal right now. Classes start back in a few weeks and You don't have to explain, he cut in. Most people make the same choice. We sat in silence for a minute. Outside, the diner cars passed on the highway, people going about their ordinary lives, unaware of the things I now knew existed. What do I need to do? I asked. To leave safely, I mean. Return your uniform. I'll handle the paperwork with Robert. John reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card with a phone number handwritten on it. If you ever see anything, the woman in white, the pool man, any sign of them outside the park, call me immediately. I took the card and put it in my wallet, trying not to think about how I'd left my actual wallet at the park last night, the very thing that had nearly gotten me killed. There's one more thing, John added, his voice grave. Never go back to any body of water associated with the park. Not the pools, not the beach access points nearby. Not even the drainage canals that connect to our system. You think they'd find me? I know they would. They've seen you now. They'll remember. His eyes held mine, making sure I understood. They don't give up once they've chosen a target. An hour later, I was back at Sunset Cove, but I didn't go inside. John had texted Robert, who brought my things out to the parking lot, my wallet, a few personal items for my locker, and my final paycheck. Sorry to see you go, Robert said, not quite meeting my eyes. He knew why I was leaving, even if we didn't speak of it directly. You were a good lifeguard. Thanks for the opportunity. I replied, the formality of the exchange almost comical, given what we both knew. I handed over my lifeguard whistle, just a simple object that represented a summer job that had turned into a nightmare. As I drove away from Sunset Cove Water Park for the final time, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman in white standing in the road behind me, or the weird figure of the pool man coming up from a drainage ditch. But the road stayed empty, the day bright and normal. That night, I started writing everything down. All I'd seen, all I'd learned, the rules that had kept me alive. Maybe it was therapy, a way to process the insanity of the past month. Maybe it was a warning, though I wasn't sure who I was warning, or how they'd ever find my account somewhere out there. The job posting that had drawn me to Sunset Cove would soon appear again. Lifeguards wanted, competitive pay, no experience necessary. Another college student would need summer money. Another person would enter the cycle John's family had kept going for generations. I closed my laptop and tried not to think about the thin places between worlds, or what might be looking through from the other side. The job offer from Lake Dolores Water Park arrived 2 weeks after I left Sunset Cove. It was an email short and to the point, offering a salary that was almost double what I'd been making. Competitive pay, the ad had said, and they weren't kidding. It was enough to cover my tuition, rent, and maybe even have some left over. The catch: Lake Dolores Water Park. I'd heard the rumors, of course. Everyone in the online forums, the ones dedicated to abandoned places and urban legends, knew about Lake Dolores. It was supposed to be haunted, a place where things went wrong. I stared at the email on my laptop screen, the words blurring. My gut screamed at me to delete it, to run as far away from water parks as possible. But my bank account balance, a stark, unforgiving number, screamed louder. I thought about John, about his warnings, about the things I'd seen. But Lake Dolores was hundreds of miles away in the middle of the desert. A different state, a different body of water. Surely it couldn't be the same. Could it? I accepted the offer. The drive to Lake Dolores was long and desolate. The landscape slowly changed from the lush, humid greenery of Florida to the dry, cracked earth of the California desert. The air grew thin and hot, the sun a relentless hammer pounding down on the cracked asphalt. For hours, the only things I saw were endless stretches of sand scrub brush and the occasional tumbleweed bouncing across the road. It felt like driving to the edge of the world. When I finally saw the sign for Lake Dolores Water Park, it was faded and peeling, leaning precariously to one side. The entrance gate was rusted open, a silent invitation to a place long forgotten. The park itself was a ghost town. Slides, once vibrant and inviting, were now bleached by the sun, their colors faded to sickly pastels. Pools were empty, cracked basins filled with dust and debris instead of water. The lazy river was a dry, winding scar across the landscape. It looked like a place where time had stopped, then slowly decayed. I parked my car in the empty lot, the silence pressing in on me, broken only by the distant hum of power lines. The air was still and hot, carrying the faint metallic scent of rust and something else. Something dry and ancient, like old bones. This wasn't just abandoned. It felt dead. I found the main office, a small squat building near the entrance. The door was unlocked, creaking open to reveal a dimly lit interior. Dust motes danced in the few shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. A man sat behind a cluttered desk, his back to me, hunched over some papers. He was old, his hair a thin halo of white, his shoulders stooped. "Mr. Silas," I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. He turned slowly, his movements stiff like an old machine. His face was a roadmap of deep wrinkles, his eyes a startling, piercing blue that seemed to see right through me. He wore a simple dark suit, oddly formal for a water park manager, especially one in a place like this. "You must be Michael," he said, his voice raspy like dry leaves rustling. "I've been expecting you." He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. He just looked at me with those unnervingly blue eyes. "Yes, sir. I'm here for the lifeguard position." "Indeed." He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. "Please sit." I sat, the old chair groaning under my weight. Mr. Silas picked up a thick, leather-bound book from his desk. It looked ancient, its cover worn smooth with age, its pages yellowed. He opened it carefully, the spine creaking, and began to read, his voice a low, monotonous drone. "Welcome to Lake Dolores Water Park. Our rules are simple but vital. They are not to be questioned. They are not to be broken." He paused, looking up at me, his blue eyes unwavering. "Rule number 1. The water is not your friend. Do not enter it unless absolutely necessary, and never alone." My stomach clenched. This was starting to sound familiar. Too familiar. Rule number 2. The laughter you hear after dark is not from children. Do not seek its source. A chill snaked down my spine despite the desert heat. Rule number 3. If you see figures in the mist, do not acknowledge them. Do not speak to them. Do not look them directly in the eye. My mind flashed back to Sunset Cove, to the fog, to the tall, shadowy figures. It was the same, the exact same rules. My heart began to pound a frantic drum against my ribs. Rule number 4. The blue locker in the staff room is not to be opened, ever. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Drew. The dark stains. The disappearance. It was all here. Rule number 5. If a figure waves to you from the deep end of any pool, wave back exactly once. No more, no less. The pale man. The one with the milky white eyes. Rule number 6. The woman in white is not to be approached. Do not offer her help. Do not respond to her pleas. Claire Mitchell, the woman from the maintenance shed. Mr. Silas closed the book with a soft thud, the sound echoing in the quiet office. He looked at me, his piercing blue eyes seeming to bore into my very soul. Do you understand these rules, Michael? I could only nod my throat too tight to speak. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. Good. He pushed a single key across the desk. It was old tarnished brass with an intricate, almost ornate head. This is for your locker, and for the staff entrance. Your uniform is in the locker room. Your first shift begins tomorrow at 7:00 a.m. You will be stationed at the main pool. I took the key, my fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the cold metal. Mr. Silas, I managed to say, my voice hoarse. What is this place? He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as if looking at something far beyond the dusty walls of his office. This place, Michael, is a mirror. A reflection of other places where the veil between worlds is thin. A place where things that should not be are. He paused, then added, his voice barely a whisper. And like all mirrors, it can show you things you wish you'd never seen. I left his office in a daze, the key heavy in my hand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the empty park. The silence was no longer just quiet. It was expectant waiting. As I walked toward the staff locker room, the air grew colder despite the lingering heat of the desert day. I heard it then. Faint at first, like a distant memory, then growing clearer. The sound of children laughing, high-pitched, joyful, innocent. But there were no children here, not anymore. And the laughter seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the empty, decaying slides and pools. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding. The laughter grew louder, closer, swirling around me, playful and chilling at the same time. It sounded like dozens of children, their voices overlapping, echoing off the cracked concrete. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a group of spectral kids playing tag among the rusted structures. Nothing. Just the long, dark shadows stretching out like grasping fingers. I reached the staff locker room, fumbling with the key, my hands shaking. The laughter was right outside the door, now swirling around me, a cacophony of unseen joy. I shoved the key into the lock, twisted it, and pushed the door open, practically falling inside. I slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against it, gasping for breath. The laughter outside faded, replaced by the sound of my own ragged breathing. The locker room was dark, the air stale and heavy. I found the light switch and flicked it on. The fluorescent lights flickered, then hummed to life, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the rows of empty lockers. And there it was. At the very end of the row, standing out against the dull gray metal of the others, was a single locker painted a deep, unnatural blue. Its surface was clean, but I could almost see the faint, dark stains that weren't there, the ones I remembered from Sunset Cove. I walked to my assigned locker, trying to ignore the blue one, trying to ignore the lingering echo of laughter in my ears. I opened my locker, and inside, neatly folded, was my new uniform. Red shorts, a red tank top, and a whistle. I picked it up, the plastic cold against my palm. It felt heavier than it should. As I changed, I kept glancing at the blue locker, a magnetic pull drawing my eyes to it. It stood there, silent, ominous, a dark secret waiting to be discovered. I finished changing, my movement stiff, and grabbed my backpack. I needed to get out of here. As I turned to leave, I saw it. A faint, almost transparent figure standing at the far end of the locker room near the showers. It was a child, small and indistinct, its form shimmering slightly in the fluorescent light. It was looking at me. And then slowly it raised its hand and waved. My blood ran cold. I remembered Rule 5. If a figure waves to you from the deep end of any pool, wave back exactly once. But this wasn't a pool. This was the locker room. And it wasn't a man. It was a child. I stood frozen, my mind screaming. Was this a test? A different rule? Or was this something new? Something even more terrifying? The child figure waved again, a slow, deliberate motion. Its head tilted slightly as if waiting for my response. Its eyes, though indistinct, seemed to bore into me, expectant. I didn't know what to do. My hand twitched, a primal urge to respond, to acknowledge, to be polite. But the memory of Drew, of the blue locker, of John's warnings held me back. I stood there paralyzed as the child figure continued to wave its form, shimmering, its presence growing stronger, colder. The air in the locker room dropped several degrees, and I could see my breath. The The child figure took a step forward, then another slowly, deliberately, its arms still raised, still waving. It was coming for me, and I still didn't know what to do. The child figure kept waving its translucent hand, rising and falling with an unnerving slowness. It was closer now, only a few feet away, its form shimmering like heat haze over asphalt. The air around it was frigid, a stark contrast to the desert night, and I could see my breath clouding in front of me. Its eyes, though indistinct, seemed to bore into me, expectant, waiting for my response. My hand twitched, a primal urge to wave back, to acknowledge, to be polite. But the memory of Drew, of the blue locker, of John's warnings held me back. This wasn't a pool. This wasn't the man. This was a child in a locker room, and the rules Mr. Silas had given me were specific to the deep end of any pool. My mind raced a frantic scramble of thoughts. Was this a test, a different rule? Or was this something new, something even more terrifying? The child figure waved again, a slow, deliberate motion, its head tilted slightly as if waiting for my response. Its presence grew stronger, colder. I stood frozen, paralyzed by indecision. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The child figure took another step, then another, slowly, deliberately, its arms still raised, still waving. It was coming for me. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang echoed through the locker room. The sound was so sharp, so unexpected, that the child figure flinched, its form flickering for a split second. It turned its head, its indistinct gaze drawn to the source of the noise. It was the blue locker. Its door, which had been tightly shut, was now slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. A faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from it, a low thrumming that vibrated through the floor and up into my feet. The child figure hesitated, its attention divided. It looked from me to the blue locker, then back to me, as if weighing its options. The air around it seemed to thicken, the cold intensifying. This was my chance. Without thinking, I lunged for the door, my legs finally obeying. I burst out of the locker room, slamming the door shut behind me, not bothering to lock it. The laughter, which had faded, now returned, swirling around me, closer than before, a cacophony of unseen joy. It was everywhere, echoing off the empty slides and pools, a playful, chilling chorus. I ran, my feet pounding on the cracked concrete, the laughter chasing me, growing louder with every step. It sounded like dozens of children, their voices overlapping, echoing off the decaying structures. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a group of spectral kids playing tag among the rusted attractions. Nothing. Just the long, dark shadows stretching out like grasping fingers. I burst out of the staff entrance and into the vast, empty parking lot. The desert night was a deep, inky black, the stars a million pinpricks of light in the vast expanse. My car was a distant, comforting silhouette. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. The laughter was right behind me now, swirling around me, a playful, chilling chorus. It sounded like dozens of children, their voices overlapping, echoing off the empty slides and pools. I jammed the key into the ignition, twisted it, and the engine roared to life, a welcome sound in the oppressive silence. I threw the car into reverse tires, squealing on the gravel, and sped out of the parking lot, leaving Lake Dolores Water Park behind me. I didn't look back. I drove for hours the desert highway, a black ribbon stretching into the endless night. The further I got from the park, the more the chilling laughter faded, replaced by the hum of the engine and the rush of wind through the open windows. I didn't stop until the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, illuminating a small, dusty diner on the side of the road. I pulled into the parking lot, my body aching, my mind exhausted. Inside the diner was brightly lit, filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and bacon. A few truckers sat at the counter, their voices low and rumbling. It was normal. So incredibly, wonderfully normal. I ordered a black coffee and a stack of pancakes, trying to push the images of the child figure and the blue locker from my mind. But they lingered, a persistent, chilling echo. As I ate, I pulled out my phone, my fingers still trembling slightly, and typed Lake Dolores Water Park history into the search bar. The results were a mix of urban legends, abandoned place forums, and a few old news articles. Most of the articles focused on the park's financial troubles and its eventual closure. But one from a local desert newspaper caught my eye. It was dated 1984, a few years after the park first opened. The headline read, "Tragedy strikes Lake Dolores, 3 children drown in unexplained accident." I clicked on the link, my heart pounding. The article described how 3 young children, all siblings, had drowned in the main pool during a busy summer day. The circumstances were unexplained, with no witnesses to how they ended up in the deep end. The bodies were recovered hours later after the park had closed. The article mentioned that the children's parents had sued the park claiming negligence, but the case was eventually dismissed. The park's reputation never recovered, and it struggled financially until its eventual closure. I scrolled down looking for more information and found a small, almost hidden paragraph at the bottom of the article. It mentioned that the children's bodies had been found with unusual markings on their skin described as faint bluish lines that resembled ancient symbols. The police had dismissed them as post-mortem artifacts, but the reporter hinted at something more sinister. My blood ran cold. Faint bluish lines. Ancient symbols. Just like the ones John had tattooed on his arm, the ones I'd seen in the Sunset Cove employee files. The ones that were supposed to be a binding contract, a protection. I closed my laptop, my appetite gone. It wasn't just a mirror, as Mr. Silas had said. It was a pattern. The same rules. The same disappearances. The same entities. And now the same symbols. I thought about the child figure in the locker room, its waving hand, its indistinct eyes, and the blue locker slightly ajar, humming with a faint, unsettling energy. What if the child wasn't trying to lure me in? What if it was trying to warn me? And what if the blue locker wasn't just a door but a trap? But I paid for my breakfast, leaving the pancakes untouched, and walked out into the bright morning sun. The desert stretched out before me, vast and indifferent. I had escaped Lake Dolores, but the knowledge I carried, the things I had seen, felt like a heavy burden. I was no longer just a college student looking for a summer job. I was a witness and a survivor. As I drove away from the diner heading east, away from the desert, away from water parks, I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found John's number. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. "John," I said, my voice raspy. "It's Michael. I think I understand now. About the mirror, about the pattern. I think I just found another one." I paused, listening to the silence on the other end. "Call me back, please." I hung up, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I was hundreds of miles away from Lake Dolores, hundreds of miles from Sunset Cove. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, lingered. The entities, whatever they were, didn't seem to care about distance. They were everywhere. And I was no longer just an observer. I was part of their game. And I had a feeling, a chilling certainty, that the game was far from over. Step-by-step plan. Establish the current narrative context and the protagonist's emotional state after the events of Part 7. Introduce a new unsettling element that suggests the entity's reach extends beyond the water parks. Develop a series of escalating subtle and then overt supernatural occurrences that invade the protagonist's personal space. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, paranoia, and the erosion of their sense of safety. Build towards a climactic moment of realization or confrontation that leaves the reader with a heightened sense of dread and anticipation. The drive back across the country was a blur of gas station coffee and paranoid glances in the rearview mirror. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every distant sound seemed to hold a hidden meaning. I didn't stop until I was back in my small apartment in Miami, the familiar walls offering little comfort. The city lights, once a beacon of normalcy, now felt like a thin veneer over something ancient and hungry. I called John again and again. It went straight to voicemail. I left another message, my voice tight with urgency, detailing what I'd seen at Lake Dolores, the mirrored rules, the child figure, the blue locker. I told him about the newspaper article, the drowned children, the bluish lines on their skin. I needed answers. I needed to know if there was a way out of this. Days turned into a week. No call back from John. The silence was more terrifying than any scream. It meant he was either unable to answer or unwilling. Both options filled me with dread. I tried to go back to my normal life, attending classes, studying, trying to forget the horrors I'd witnessed. But the world felt different now. Every reflection in a shop window seemed to hold a fleeting, distorted image. Every gurgle from a storm drain sounded like a whisper. One evening I was studying in my apartment, the only sound the hum of my laptop and the distant city traffic. I was trying to focus on a textbook, but my eyes kept drifting to the glass of water on my desk. The surface was perfectly still. Then a tiny ripple appeared, spreading slowly from the center, as if something invisible had just touched it. My breath hitched. I stared at it, my heart pounding, waiting for a pale hand to rise from the glass. Nothing. The ripple faded, and the water went still again. I pushed the glass away, my hand shaking. The next morning I woke up to a strange smell in my apartment. Like stagnant water and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. I searched every room but couldn't find the source. The smell lingered, a faint, unsettling presence that clung to the air. Later that day, I was walking to class trying to blend in with the bustling crowd of students. As I passed a public fountain, its water sparkling in the sun, I heard it. Faint, high-pitched laughter. It was playful, innocent, but it sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I stopped, my head snapping around, searching the faces in the crowd. No children, just students talking, laughing, oblivious. The laughter from the fountain grew louder, swirling around me, a chorus of unseen joy. I walked faster, my pace quickening to a near run, until the sound faded behind me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of leaves outside my window sounded amplified, sinister. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the horrors of Sunset Cove and Lake Dolores. The blue locker, the woman in white, the pale man, the shadows in the fog, and now the laughter. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint scratching sound coming from my bathroom. It was rhythmic, persistent, like something was trying to claw its way out of the drain. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew what those sounds meant. I'd seen the scratch marks around the pools at Sunset Cove. I crept out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cool floor. I moved slowly toward the bathroom door, my hand reaching for the doorknob. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, accompanied by a low, guttural, gurgling sound. It sounded like something was struggling, fighting to get through. I flung the door open, flicked on the light, and stared. The scratching stopped. The gurgling stopped. The bathroom was empty. The sink, the toilet, the shower. All normal. But then I saw it. On the porcelain rim of the bathtub just above the drain were 3 faint, parallel scratch marks. Too evenly spaced to be random. Too deep to be made by human nails. They were fresh, still slightly damp. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the marks, a cold dread spreading through me. They were here. They had found me. They were trying to get in. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my living room, the lights on a baseball bat clutched in my hands. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. Every sound from outside felt like a prelude to something terrible. The next day I went to class, but I couldn't focus. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and paranoia. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a call from John, a sign that I wasn't alone in this. Nothing. That afternoon, as I walked back to my apartment, I noticed something strange. The street was unusually quiet. The usual city hum was muted, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The air felt heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. I looked around, my eyes darting, searching. Then I saw her. She stood at the end of the street near the storm drain, partially obscured by the shadow of a large oak tree. The woman in white. Her wet hair clung to her face, hiding her features. But I knew it was her. Water pooled at her feet, even though the street was completely dry. She was looking directly at me. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just at the park anymore. She was here, in my city, on my street. I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs, a frantic drum. I wanted to run, to scream, to disappear. But I couldn't move. She took a step forward, then another, slowly, deliberately, her bare feet making no sound on the asphalt. "Michael." Her voice whispered, soft but clear, carrying on the still air. It was the same voice I'd heard behind the maintenance shed, the same voice that had pleaded for help. "You shouldn't have left." I finally found my voice, a hoarse whisper. "Stay away from me." She kept coming, her form shimmering slightly in the dim light. "You know too much now. You're one of us." "I'm not one of you," I yelled, my voice cracking. She stopped a few feet away, her head tilted slightly as if assessing me. Her wet hair parted slightly, revealing a glimpse of her face. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and a milky, opaque white, just like the man in the pool. And then slowly, a patch of skin near her temple began to ripple and peel back like wet paper, revealing something gray and textured underneath. "You belong with us," she whispered, her voice changing, taking on a desperate, almost guttural edge. "In the water." I turned and ran, my legs pumping, my lungs burning. I didn't look back. I ran until I reached my apartment building, burst through the door and slammed it shut, locking it, bolting it, anything to keep her out. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I was trapped. The rules, the guardians, the parks, they weren't just about containment. They were about a game, and I was now a player. The entities weren't just confined to water parks. They were everywhere, and they were coming for me. The phone in my pocket vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "You can't run forever. The water always finds its way. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate aftermath of the previous part, focusing on the protagonist's heightened paranoia and sense of being hunted. Introduce a new unsettling element that suggests the entities are actively manipulating the protagonist's environment and perceptions. Develop a series of escalating subtle and then overt supernatural occurrences that invade the protagonist's personal space, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their deteriorating mental state, and the erosion of their sense of safety and sanity. Build towards a climactic moment of desperate action, or a chilling revelation that leaves the reader with a profound sense of dread and anticipation." The text message, stark and chilling, burned into my mind. "You can't run forever. The water always finds its way." I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, wanting to reply, to scream, to demand answers. But what would I say, and who was sending it? The entity's John, a sick prankster. I deleted the message, as if erasing it from my phone could erase it from my memory, from my reality. I spent the next few days in a haze of paranoia. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every reflection seemed to hold a fleeting, distorted image. I avoided all bodies of water, even the shower, opting for quick, cold sponge baths. The smell of stagnant water and something metallic, faintly sweet, clung to my apartment, a constant reminder of their presence. I tried to go to classes, but I couldn't focus. My mind was a whirlwind of fear, my eyes constantly darting, searching for any sign of them. One afternoon, I was walking home from campus, the sun beating down, when I noticed something strange. The air, usually thick with the humid scent of Miami, now carried a faint, unmistakable smell of chlorine. It grew stronger with every step until it was overwhelming, burning my nostrils. I looked around, confused. There were no pools nearby, no public fountains. Just concrete and asphalt and the distant hum of traffic. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water. It felt like I was walking through a giant invisible swimming pool. I hurried home, the smell clinging to me, seeping into my clothes, my skin. When I opened my apartment door, the chlorine smell was even stronger inside, mixed with that metallic, sweet scent. It was everywhere. I ran to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the phantom smell. But it lingered, a constant, suffocating presence. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scratching from the bathroom drain returned louder this time, more insistent. It was accompanied by a new sound, a soft, rhythmic splashing, as if something was moving in the water just beneath the porcelain. I lay in bed rigid with fear, listening to the sounds, my heart pounding against my ribs. Then the laughter started. Faint at first, like a distant memory, then growing clearer, closer. It was the high-pitched, joyful, innocent laughter of children swirling around my apartment, echoing off the walls. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, a playful, chilling chorus. I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to block out the sounds, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But the laughter grew louder, closer, swirling around me, a cacophony of unseen joy. It sounded like dozens of children, their voices overlapping, echoing through my small apartment. Suddenly, the scratching and splashing from the bathroom stopped. The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. I held my breath, listening, my ears straining in the darkness. Then a new sound, a soft, wet thud coming from my bedroom floor. I slowly pulled the blanket down, my eyes wide with terror. The floor was wet, not just damp, but covered in a thin layer of water, reflecting the dim light from the streetlights outside my window. It was spreading slowly, insidiously from beneath my bed across the carpet toward the door. The water was clear, but it carried that faint metallic sweet smell. And in the dim light I could see something else in the water. Faint bluish lines swirling and shifting like ancient symbols drawn in liquid. My breath hitched. They were here, in my apartment. The water had found its way. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet splashing in the cold water. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the spreading puddle, my mind screaming. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. The water continued to spread slowly, relentlessly, covering more and more of the floor. The bluish lines in it pulsed faintly, as if alive. And then from beneath my bed, a dark shape began to emerge. It was indistinct at first, a shifting mass in the murky water. But as it rose, it began to take on a familiar form. A human shape. Pale, almost translucent skin. It was the man from the pool. He rose slowly from the water, his head and shoulders emerging first, then his torso. His hair, dark and slick, clung to his scalp. His eyes, milky white and unblinking, were fixed on me. He was dripping wet, but the water around him seemed to cling to his skin, not falling off. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate wave. My mind screamed. Rule 5. If a figure waves to you from the deep end of any pool, wave back exactly once. But this wasn't a pool. This was my bedroom. And he wasn't just waving. He was inviting me. Into the water. Into his world. I stood frozen, my hand twitching, a primal urge to respond, to acknowledge. But the memory of Drew, of the blue locker, of John's warnings held me back. I couldn't. I wouldn't. The man from the pool took a step forward, his bare feet making no sound in the shallow water. He was coming for me. His smile widened, too wide, too fake, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. "Join us, Michael." His voice whispered, a low, guttural gurgle that seemed to come from deep underwater. "The water is waiting." I turned and ran, splashing through the water that now covered my entire bedroom floor. I burst out of my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me, not bothering to lock it. I ran down the hallway, my bare feet slapping on the cold tile, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, then stumbled down the steps, two at a time, desperate to get out to escape. I burst out of the apartment building and into the street, gasping for breath. The night air was cool against my skin, a welcome relief from the suffocating dread of my apartment. I looked back at my building, its windows dark and silent. No lights, no sounds. Just the faint lingering smell of chlorine and something metallic. I knew I couldn't go back. Not now, not ever. My apartment, my sanctuary, had been breached. The entities were no longer confined to water parks. They were here. They were everywhere. And they were coming for me. I started walking aimlessly at first, then, with a growing sense of purpose. I needed to find John. He was the only one who understood. The only one who could help. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling, and dialed his number again. This time, it rang. Once, twice. Then a click. "Michael." John's voice, raspy and tired, but undeniably real, came through the phone. "John, thank God." I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. "They're here. They found me. They're in my apartment. The water. The man from the pool." "Calm down, Michael," John said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I walked, talking into the phone, recounting every terrifying detail, the chlorine smell, the scratching, the laughter, the water spreading across my floor, the man from the pool. John listened patiently, interjecting only with a few questions, his voice calm, reassuring. "You did well, Michael," he said, when I finished, his voice holding a hint of approval. "You didn't wave back. You didn't acknowledge him. But they're here, John. They're not just at the parks anymore. They're everywhere. They're coming for me." "I know," John said, his voice grim. "That's why I didn't call you back. I've been busy, trying to contain a new breach, but it seems they've found a way around it." He paused, and I could hear a faint, distant gurgling sound on his end of the line. "Listen, Michael, you need to get out of Miami, now. Go somewhere far from any major bodies of water. The desert, maybe, or the mountains. But what about you? What about Sunset Cove?" "I'll handle it," John said, his voice firm. "But you're a target now. They won't stop until they get you. You need to disappear." "But where do I go? What do I do?" "I'll send you some information. A place, a contact, someone who can help you. But you need to move. Tonight." "Okay," I said, my voice trembling. "Okay, I'll go." "Good." John's voice softened slightly. "And Michael, be careful. The water always finds its way." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the screen dark, the silence deafening. I was alone, on the run, hunted by things that shouldn't exist. But I had a plan, a destination, and a faint glimmer of hope that John the Guardian could somehow keep them at bay, at least for a little while longer. I started walking, my eyes scanning the dark streets, my mind racing, already planning my escape. the game was far from over, and I was determined to survive. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate aftermath of the previous part, focusing on the protagonist's desperate flight and the lingering sense of dread. Introduce a new isolated setting that offers a temporary reprieve, but also a new kind of unsettling atmosphere. Develop a series of subtle psychological horrors that play on the protagonist's paranoia and the feeling of being watched even in a seemingly safe place. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their attempts to cope, and the slow erosion of their sanity as the entity's influence extends. Build towards a climactic moment of discovery or a chilling encounter that confirms the entity's pervasive reach, leaving the reader with a profound sense of inescapable terror. John's text came through an hour after our call. A remote address in the Arizona desert, a small town called Blackwood, and a name, Elias Thorne. No other instructions, just a destination and a contact. It was enough. I packed a single backpack with essentials, grabbed what little cash I had, and left my apartment, not bothering to look back. The city lights faded in my rearview mirror as I drove west, leaving Miami behind, leaving the water, leaving the things that hunted me. The drive was a blur of endless highway fueled by cheap coffee and a gnawing fear that kept me awake. Every gas station bathroom felt like a potential trap. Every motel room felt like a temporary cage. I avoided all bodies of water, even the smallest puddles, my paranoia a constant companion. The further I drove into the desert, the more the air dried out, the more the landscape turned to rock and sand, the more I felt a fragile sense of relief. No large bodies of water here, no places for them to hide. After 3 days of relentless driving, I finally saw the faded sign for Blackwood. It was a speck on the map, a collection of dusty buildings huddled together against the vast, indifferent desert. The town was quiet, almost eerily so. A single gas station, a general store, and a handful of houses. No water park, no large lakes, just endless dry land. I found Elias Thorne's address easily enough. It was a small, unassuming house on the edge of town surrounded by a low wooden fence. A single gnarled mesquite tree stood in the front yard, its branches twisted like ancient bones. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding, a mix of hope and trepidation churning in my stomach. The door opened slowly, revealing an old man with a weathered face, deep lines etched around his eyes, and a long white beard that reached his chest. His eyes, though, were sharp and clear, holding a depth that reminded me of John. He wore simple, practical clothes and carried a faint scent of dust and something else, something earthy and ancient. "Michael," he asked, his voice raspy like dry leaves rustling. "Yes, sir. John sent me." Elias nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Come in. You look like you've seen a ghost." I stepped into the house, and the door closed softly behind me. The interior was surprisingly cozy, filled with books and strange artifacts. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with old tomes, maps, and objects I couldn't identify. Polished stones, dried herbs, intricate carvings made of wood and bone. The air was warm, dry, and smelled faintly of cedar and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, but that felt protective. Elias led me to a small, cluttered living room and gestured to a worn armchair. "Sit. You've had a long journey." He poured me a glass of water from a pitcher on a nearby table. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the glass, remembering the spreading puddle in my apartment, the man from the pool. Elias seemed to notice my hesitation. "It's well water," he said, his voice gentle. "From deep underground, untouched by other things." I took the glass, my hand trembling slightly, and took a sip. The water was cool and clean, tasting faintly of minerals. It was the first time I'd felt truly safe drinking water in weeks. "John called me," Elias said, settling into a chair opposite me. "He told me what happened, what you saw. He said you could help me." Elias nodded slowly. "I can offer you sanctuary, a place where they cannot easily reach you. But you must understand, Michael, they are persistent, and they are patient." "What are they, Elias? What do they want?" Elias sighed, a long, weary sound. "They are echoes, remnants of something ancient, something that existed before our world, before our understanding. They are drawn to places where the veil between realities is thin, places where the boundaries blur, and they are hungry for life, for experience, for a way back into our world. The water parks, I said, a chilling realization. They're not just thin places, they're traps or gateways. Both, Elias confirmed. My family, like John's, has been guarding these places for generations. We are the keepers of the boundaries, the ones who ensure the veil remains intact. So John's family guards the water parks and your family guards. What other thin places? Elias said, his gaze distant. Ancient wells, forgotten springs, underground rivers, places where the earth itself remembers what lies beneath. And the rules are the binding, the contract. They are ancient rituals passed down through generations designed to contain the entities to limit their influence. As long as the rules are followed, they cannot fully manifest. They cannot truly cross over. But they found me, I said, my voice trembling. In my apartment, they sent me a text message. Elias nodded, his expression grim. They are learning, adapting. The more you see them, the more you acknowledge them, the stronger their connection to you becomes. They are trying to pull you in to make you one of them. What do? You stay here. You learn. You prepare. Elias looked at me, his eyes holding a deep, ancient wisdom. You are a witness, Michael. And now you are a target. But you are also a survivor. And that makes you valuable. I stayed with Elias in Blackwood. The days were long and hot, the nights cool and silent. I helped him with chores around the house, learned about the strange artifacts he collected, and listened to his stories of other thin places, other guardians, other entities. He taught me about the history of the veil, about the ancient rituals, about the subtle signs of their presence. He taught me how to recognize their whispers, their illusions, their attempts to lure me in. The paranoia didn't disappear, but it changed. It became a dull ache, a constant hum beneath the surface of my awareness. I still avoided water, but I learned to trust the well water from Elias's house. I still jumped at shadows, but I learned to distinguish between the harmless creaks of an old house and the subtle shifts that signaled their presence. One evening, I was sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. The air was still and dry, carrying the faint scent of dust and mesquite. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. Then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched giggle carried on the wind. It was playful, innocent, but it sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I froze, my eyes darting, searching the vast, empty landscape. Nothing. Just the endless desert stretching out to the horizon. The giggle came again, closer this time, swirling around me, a chorus of unseen joy. It sounded like dozens of children, their voices overlapping, echoing through the silent desert. I stood up, my heart pounding, my eyes wide with terror. There were no children here. No water, no place for them to hide. Elias appeared beside me, his face grim. They're here, he said, his voice low. They've found you. The giggling grew louder, closer, swirling around us, a cacophony of unseen joy. And then from the dry, cracked earth of the desert floor, a faint mist began to rise. It was thin, ethereal, swirling and shifting, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of chlorine, and something metallic, faintly sweet. How? I whispered, my voice trembling. There's no water here. Elias looked at me, his eyes holding a chilling certainty. The water always finds its way, Michael, even in the desert. Through the swirling mist, I saw them. Tall, thin shadows sliding silently between the mesquite trees. They moved in a strange, disjointed way, leaving no footprints on the dry earth. Their forms were indistinct, shimmering slightly, like heat haze over asphalt. The giggling intensified, turning into a chorus of delighted, chilling laughter. And then, from the thickest part of the mist, a figure began to emerge. It was a child, small and indistinct, its form shimmering slightly. It was looking at me. And then slowly it raised its hand and waved. My blood ran cold. It was the child figure from Lake Dolores. And it was here, in the middle of the desert. Elias stepped forward, his hand reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, flat metal disc covered with symbols similar to those I had seen on John's arm and on the employee files. He pressed it into my palm. Hold this, he said, his voice urgent. Don't let go of it no matter what you see or hear. The amulet was warm on my skin, and it seemed to buzz with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. Elias pulled out another one for himself, then started walking a specific, deliberate pattern around the house, his lips moving in a low, guttural chant. I stayed close behind him, holding the amulet tightly, my eyes darting through the swirling mist. The shapes in the fog grew more numerous and bolder. They moved around us just out of clear sight, looking strange and wrong, like their arms were too long, and they bent in ways they shouldn't. The giggling turned into a chorus of delighted, chilling laughter swirling around us, a cacophony of unseen joy. The child figure took a step forward, then another, slowly, deliberately, its arms still raised, still waving. It was coming for me. Its eyes, though indistinct, seemed to bore into me expectant. Elias stopped his chanting, his voice sharp. "Do not acknowledge it, Michael. Do not respond." I stood frozen, my hand twitching, a primal urge to respond, to acknowledge. But Elias's words, John's warnings, echoed in my mind. I wouldn't. I couldn't. The child figure stopped a few feet away, its form shimmering, its presence growing stronger, colder. The air around it dropped several degrees, and I could see my breath. It tilted its head as if confused, then let out a frustrated, inhuman shriek. At the same moment, the mist began to recede slowly, imperceptibly at first, then faster. The shapes backed away, retreating into the fading mist. The giggling faded, replaced by the silence of the desert night. By the time the mist was completely gone, the desert was still and empty, as if nothing had happened. Elias took back the amulet, looking exhausted, lines of weariness etched deep into his face. "It's over for now," he said, his voice weary. "But they will be back. They always are." I looked out at the vast, empty desert, the stars, a million pinpricks of light in the inky blackness. They had found me, even here, in the middle of nowhere. The water always finds its way. And I knew with a chilling certainty that my fight for survival was far from over. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate aftermath of the previous part, focusing on the protagonist's emotional state and the new understanding of the entity's pervasive reach. Introduce a period of intense training and learning under Elias, detailing the ancient knowledge and rituals. Develop a series of escalating subtle and then overt supernatural occurrences that test the protagonist's newfound skills and resilience, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their growing connection to the entities, and the psychological toll of constant vigilance. Build towards a climactic moment of a new, more dangerous encounter that forces the protagonist to confront their fears and utilize their training, leaving the reader with a profound sense of dread and anticipation for what comes next. The encounter in the desert left me shaken, but also with a grim clarity. They weren't just confined to water parks. They weren't just in Miami or Lake Dolores. They were everywhere, and they were coming for me. Elias's words echoed in my mind. The water always finds its way. The next few weeks were a blur of intense learning. Elias became my mentor, a patient but demanding teacher. He taught me about the ancient history of the Veil, about the delicate balance between our world and theirs. He showed me old maps, hand-drawn and faded, marking other thin places across the globe, forgotten wells in remote villages, hidden springs in ancient forests, underground rivers flowing beneath bustling cities. Each marked with symbols similar to the ones on John's arm, and on Elias's own, a faded tattoo on his wrist. He taught me about the entities themselves. Not what they were exactly, but what they did. How they manifested. How they lured. How they fed. He explained that they were drawn to strong emotions, especially fear and despair. They thrived on chaos, on the breakdown of order. And water, he explained, was their primary conduit. Not just large bodies of water, but any water, rain, dew, even the moisture in the air. They are echoes. Elias would say, his voice low and grave, as he showed me ancient texts filled with strange symbols and faded drawings. Remnants of something that existed before our world, before our understanding. They are drawn to places where the veil between realities is thin, places where the boundaries blur. And they are hungry for life, for experience, for a way back into our world. He taught me the rituals, the chants, the symbols. Not for fighting, he explained, but for protection. For strengthening the veil, for pushing them back. He showed me how to recognize their whispers, their illusions, their attempts to lure me in. He taught me how to focus my mind, how to build mental barriers, how to trust my instincts. The amulets, he explained, were not just metal discs. They were conduits imbued with ancient power designed to resonate with the veil to create a localized barrier. He taught me how to activate them, how to feel their faint hum, how to use them as a shield against their influence. My paranoia didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became a heightened awareness, a constant vigilance. I still avoided water, but I learned to trust the well water from Elias's house, understanding its protective properties. I still jumped at shadows, but I learned to distinguish between the harmless creaks of an old house and the subtle shifts that signaled their presence. The entities, however, were persistent. The first few weeks were subtle, faint whispers on the wind just at the edge of hearing calling my name, fleeting glimpses of shadows in my peripheral vision gone when I turned to look, the faint lingering smell of chlorine and something metallic sweet even in the dry desert air. I would wake up in the middle of the night convinced I heard the sound of dripping water only to find everything dry. Then they grew bolder. One afternoon I was practicing a protective chant Elias had taught me sitting cross-legged on the floor, my eyes closed, focusing on the rhythm of the words. The air in the room was still and warm. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, a sudden, unnatural chill that raised goosebumps on my arms. I opened my eyes. The air in front of me shimmered, distorting the bookshelves, the furniture, and then a faint, almost transparent figure began to form in the shimmering air. It was indistinct, a shifting mass of light and shadow, but I could feel its presence, cold and malevolent. I immediately grabbed the amulet Elias had given me, clutched it in my hand, and focused on the chant, my voice trembling but firm. The amulet hummed a faint vibration against my palm. The shimmering figure wavered its form, flickering, then slowly, reluctantly, it began to recede, dissolving back into the air. The temperature returned to normal, and the room was still again. I sat there, breathing heavily, my heart pounding, but a new sense of accomplishment, a fragile confidence bloomed within me. I had pushed it back. A few days later, I was helping Elias tend to his small garden, pulling weeds from the dry, dusty soil. The sun beat down relentless, and the air was thick with the scent of dry earth and mesquite. As I reached for a particularly stubborn weed, my hand brushed against something cold and wet. I pulled my hand back, startled, and looked down. A small puddle of water had formed on the dry ground, shimmering in the sunlight. It was clear, but in its depths, I could see faint, bluish lines swirling and shifting like ancient symbols drawn in liquid. My blood ran cold. There had been no rain, no irrigation. The ground was bone dry. The water had simply appeared. And then from the center of the puddle, a tiny ripple appeared, spreading slowly, deliberately. I looked up, my eyes scanning the horizon. The desert stretched out vast and empty, but I could feel their presence, a cold, watchful gaze. They were here. They were always here. I ran back to the house, my heart pounding, and told Elias what I had seen. He listened, his face grim. "They are testing you, Michael," he said, his voice low. "They are trying to break your resolve, to make you doubt what is real." The psychological toll began to mount. I started seeing things at the edge of my vision, fleeting shadows, distorted reflections in windows, the faint shimmer of heat haze that seemed to hold a hidden form. I heard whispers on the wind calling my name, sometimes in a child's voice, sometimes in a woman's, sometimes in a guttural gurgle that made my skin crawl. I knew they were illusions, attempts to lure me, but they were so real, so persistent, that it became harder and harder to distinguish them from reality. Sleep became a luxury. Every night I would wake up to the sound of dripping water, or faint scratching from the walls, or the chilling laughter of unseen children. I would lie in bed clutching the amulet, chanting the protective words Elias had taught me until the sounds faded, or until exhaustion finally claimed me. One night the sounds were different. Not just whispers or scratching, but a low rhythmic thrumming vibrating through the floor, through the very air. It was coming from outside the house, from the direction of the old dry well in Elias's backyard. I crept out of bed, my heart pounding, and looked out the window. The moon was full, casting a stark silver light over the desert. The thrumming was louder now, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to shake the very ground. And then I saw it. A faint mist swirling and shifting, rising from the mouth of the old well. It was thin, ethereal, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of chlorine and something metallic, faintly sweet. Elias was already there, standing by the well, his back to me, his hands raised, chanting in a low, guttural voice. He held an amulet in each hand, their surfaces glowing faintly in the moonlight. The mist around the well thickened, swirling faster, and I could see tall, thin shadows moving within it. Their forms indistinct, their movements disjointed. Suddenly a new sound erupted from the well, a deep, resonant roar like something ancient and powerful awakening. The ground trembled and a crack appeared in the dry earth near the well, spreading outward like a spiderweb. Elias stumbled, his chant faltering. The mist around the well surged outward, engulfing him, engulfing the backyard. The shadows within it grew bolder, their forms becoming clearer, more defined. They were tall, gaunt figures, their limbs too long, their bodies twisted and contorted. Their heads were indistinct, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and hungry. "Elias!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. He was struggling, his body writhing in the mist, his chants weak and broken. The shadows were closing in on him, their long clawed hands reaching out. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the amulet from my bedside table, clutched it in my hand, and ran out of the house into the swirling mist, into the heart of the nightmare. The cold hit me like a physical blow, and the smell of chlorine and blood was overwhelming. The laughter of unseen children echoed around me, a chilling chorus of delight. I pushed through the mist, my eyes straining to see Elias. He was on his knees, surrounded by the shadows, his body racked with tremors. His amulets had fallen from his hands, lying on the ground, their faint glow almost extinguished. I reached him, knelt beside him, and grabbed one of the fallen amulets. It was cold, almost lifeless. I pressed it into his hand, then grabbed the other one and clutched it in my own. I focused my mind, remembering Elias's teachings, remembering the chants, the symbols, the protective barriers. I began to chant, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger, more confident. The amulet in my hand hummed a faint vibration against my palm. The mist around us wavered, and the shadows recoiled, their forms flickering. The roar from the well intensified, a furious guttural sound that shook the ground. The crack in the earth widened, and a dark, viscous liquid began to seep out, spreading across the dry ground. It was water, black and oily, carrying the faint metallic smell of blood. The shadows surged forward, their long, clawed hands reaching for me, for Elias. The child figure from Lake Dolores appeared in front of me, its form shimmering, its hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave. "Join us, Michael!" Its voice whispered, a high-pitched, innocent sound that was utterly terrifying. "The water is waiting!" I closed my eyes, focusing on the chant on the amulet on the protective barrier. I wouldn't acknowledge it. I wouldn't respond. I wouldn't give them permission. The cold intensified, pressing in on me, suffocating. I felt a sharp, burning pain on my arm, as if something had clawed at me. I gritted my teeth, pushing through the pain, pushing through the fear, my chant growing louder, more defiant. Then a sudden, blinding flash of light erupted from the amulets. A wave of pure energy surged outward, pushing back the mist, pushing back the shadows. The roar from the well faltered, then faded. The black water receded, sinking back into the earth. When the light faded, the mist was gone. The shadows were gone. The well was silent, its mouth dark and still. Elias lay on the ground, unconscious, his breathing shallow. I knelt beside him, my body trembling, my arm throbbing with pain. I looked down at my arm. 3 faint bluish lines like ancient symbols were etched into my skin just above my wrist. They pulsed faintly, a dull ache radiating from them. I had pushed them back, but they had left their mark. And I knew with a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning. I was no longer just a witness. I was a guardian, and the fight for our world had just begun. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate aftermath of the previous part, focusing on the protagonist's new physical mark and the weight of their new role. Introduce a period of recovery and deeper understanding of the guardian's life, including the sacrifices and the constant vigilance. Develop a new, more insidious form of entity manifestation that targets the protagonist's mind and sanity, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their attempts to maintain their grip on reality, and the psychological toll of constant exposure to the entities. Build towards a climactic moment of a personal test, or a chilling revelation about the nature of the entity's influence, leaving the reader with a profound sense of inescapable dread and the heavy burden of their new reality. The bluish lines on my arm pulsed faintly, a dull ache radiating from them, a constant reminder of the night at the well. Elias had been unconscious for hours, his breathing shallow, his face pale and drawn. I sat beside him, clutching the amulet, my body trembling, the adrenaline slowly draining from me, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. When Elias finally stirred, it was with a low groan. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly settling on me. "Michael." He rasped, his voice weak. "You did it." "You're hurt?" I said, my voice hoarse. He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "A small price. The veil held. For now." He looked at my arm, his gaze lingering on the bluish lines. The mark. It means you're truly one of us now. What does it do? It's a connection, a conduit. It allows you to feel their presence more acutely, to wield the amulets more effectively, but it also makes you a stronger target. He pushed himself up, wincing, and I helped him to his feet. We need to rest, and then we train. The next few weeks were a blur of recovery and relentless training. Elias, though still weak, pushed me harder than ever before. He taught me more complex chants, intricate hand gestures, and ancient breathing techniques designed to focus my energy, to strengthen my mind against their influence. He explained that the mark on my arm wasn't just a symbol, it was a living part of the binding, a direct link to the veil itself. It allowed me to sense their presence, even when they were far away, a faint chill, a subtle shift in the air, a whisper at the edge of hearing. But it also meant they could sense me. The entities, however, were not deterred. They simply changed their tactics. The physical manifestations became less frequent, replaced by a more insidious psychological assault. They invaded my dreams. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding the images, vivid and terrifying, drowning children, their faces distorted by water. The woman in white, her jaw unhinged, screaming my name. The pale man, his milky eyes fixed on me, inviting me into the depths. The dreams were so real, so visceral, that it became harder and harder to distinguish them from reality. During the day, the whispers returned, more persistent, more seductive. They would call my name, sometimes in a child's voice, sometimes in a woman's, sometimes in a guttural gurgle that made my skin crawl. They would promise me power, knowledge, an end to the fear, if only I would join them in the water. I knew they were illusions, attempts to lure me, but their voices were so compelling, so persuasive, that I often found myself fighting the urge to respond, to acknowledge them. The mark on my arm would pulse and ache whenever their influence grew stronger, a constant throbbing reminder of their presence. Sometimes the bluish lines would glow faintly in the darkness, casting an eerie light on my skin. Elias noticed my struggle. He taught me mental exercises, visualization techniques to build impenetrable walls in my mind, to block out their whispers, to resist their temptations. He taught me to focus on the mundane, on the tangible, on the reality of the desert around me, the feel of the dry earth, the scent of the mesquite, the warmth of the sun on my skin. They feed on your fear, Michael, he would say, his voice calm and steady. They thrive on your doubt. You must not give them that power. One afternoon, I was alone in the house, Elias having gone into town for supplies. I was practicing a new chant, my eyes closed, focusing on the rhythm of the words, the hum of the amulet in my hand. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind outside. Then the air grew heavy, thick with that familiar, unsettling presence. The temperature dropped, a sudden, unnatural chill that raised goosebumps on my arms. The whispers began soft at first, then growing louder, swirling around me, calling my name, promising release. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the chant, on the amulet, on the protective barrier. The mark on my arm pulsed, a dull ache radiating from it. Suddenly, the whispers changed. They became familiar voices. My mother's voice calling my name, pleading with me to come home. My father's voice, stern and disappointed, telling me I was a fool for leaving. My friends' voices laughing, inviting me to parties, to normal life. They were so real, so vivid, that I almost opened my eyes, almost responded. Michael, my mother's voice whispered right beside my ear, soft and loving. Come home. It's safe here. The water is warm. I fought against it, my mind screaming, my body trembling. This wasn't real. It was an illusion, a trick. Then the laughter started. High-pitched, joyful, innocent. It was the laughter of children swirling around me, echoing through the house, a cacophony of unseen joy. It grew louder, closer, until it was deafening, overwhelming, pressing in on me from all sides. I felt a cold, wet touch on my cheek. I flinched, my eyes still closed, my chant faltering. The touch lingered cold and clammy, then moved down my neck across my shoulder. Join us, Michael, a child's voice whispered right beside my ear, innocent and terrifying. The water is waiting. I opened my eyes. I was no longer in Elias's living room. I was standing in the middle of a vast, dark ocean, the water cold and black, stretching out to an endless horizon. The sky above was a swirling vortex of dark clouds, illuminated by flashes of lightning that revealed glimpses of towering skeletal structures rising from the depths. The air was thick with the smell of salt and something metallic sweet. Around me, hundreds of figures floated in the water, their forms indistinct, shimmering like heat haze. They were tall, gaunt, their limbs too long, their bodies twisted and contorted. Their heads were indistinct, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and hungry. The child figure from Lake Dolores floated in front of me, its form shimmering, its hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave. Its eyes, milky white and unblinking, were fixed on me. "Join us, Michael." Its voice whispered a high-pitched, innocent sound that was utterly terrifying. "The water is waiting." My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum. This was it. This was their final push. They had pulled me into their world, into their domain. I looked down at my arm. The bluish lines on my skin glowed brightly, pulsing with a fierce protective energy. The amulet in my hand hummed, vibrating with a powerful force. I closed my eyes again, focusing on the chant on the amulet, on the protective barrier. I wouldn't acknowledge them. I wouldn't respond. I wouldn't give them permission. The cold intensified, pressing in on me, suffocating. I felt a sharp burning pain on my arm, as if something was trying to tear the mark from my skin. I gritted my teeth, pushing through the pain, pushing through the fear, my chant growing louder, more defiant. Then a sudden, blinding flash of light erupted from the amulet. A wave of pure energy surged outward, pushing back the darkness, pushing back the figures. The whispers faded. The laughter died, replaced by a deafening silence. When the light faded, I was back in Elias's living room, kneeling on the floor, my body trembling, drenched in sweat. The air was warm and dry, and the only sound was my own ragged breathing. The mark on my arm still pulsed, a dull ache radiating from it, but the bluish lines were no longer glowing. Elias stood over me, his face grim, but with a hint of pride in his eyes. "You did well, Michael," he said, his voice low. "You resisted. They pulled me in," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I was there, in their world." Elias nodded. "A powerful illusion, a desperate attempt. But you held the line." He extended a hand and helped me to my feet. "You are stronger than you know." I looked at my arm, at the bluish lines that now seemed to be a permanent part of me. I was a guardian now, not just an apprentice. The entities had shown me their world, their hunger, their relentless pursuit. But I had also shown them my resolve, my refusal to break. The fight was far from over, but I was no longer just a victim. I was a warrior, and I was ready. Step-by-step plan. Establish the protagonist's new level of understanding and their acceptance of the guardian role, focusing on the psychological impact of their experiences. Introduce a new, more complex challenge that requires active intervention beyond passive defense, hinting at a larger interconnected threat. Develop a series of escalating physical and psychological horrors that test the protagonist's training and resolve, blurring the lines between their personal life and their guardian duties. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their growing connection to the network of guardians, and the sacrifices required to maintain the veil. Build towards a climactic moment of a critical mission, or a chilling revelation about the entity's ultimate goal, leaving the reader with a profound sense of inescapable dread and the heavy burden of their new reality. The illusion of their world, the cold black ocean, the skeletal structures, the hungry figures. It lingered in my mind, a chilling echo that refused to fade. But so did the feeling of the amulet humming in my hand, the power of the chant, the surge of energy that had pushed them back. I was a guardian now. The bluish lines on my arm, a permanent tattoo of my new reality, pulsed faintly, a constant reminder of the veil of the entities of my purpose. Elias continued my training, pushing me harder, teaching me not just to defend, but to understand. He explained that the entities weren't just random manifestations. They were part of a larger interconnected network, a collective consciousness that sought to breach the veil. Each thin place was a weak point, a potential gateway. And each guardian was a living part of the defense. The veil is like a tapestry, Elias explained one evening, tracing intricate patterns on a dusty map with his finger. Each guardian, each thin place is a thread. If one thread weakens, the whole tapestry frays. If one thread breaks, the whole thing unravels. He taught me about the other guardians, a scattered network of individuals across the globe, each protecting their own thin place. They communicated rarely through coded messages and ancient rituals, sharing information about new manifestations, new tactics, new threats. It was a lonely, thankless existence, a constant vigil against an unseen enemy. My dreams continued to be a battleground. The entities still invaded their illusions, more cunning, more seductive. They would show me visions of a normal life, a life without fear, without the mark, without the constant dread. They would offer me peace, happiness, if only I would let go, if only I would embrace the water. But I learned to recognize their tricks, to see through the illusions, to push them back with the strength of my will and the power of the chance. The whispers, too, became more sophisticated. They would mimic the voices of people I knew, people I missed, my parents, my friends, even John. They would try to exploit my guilt, my loneliness, my longing for a normal life. But Elias had taught me to listen, not just to the words, but to the underlying resonance, the subtle discord that betrayed their true nature. One morning I woke up with a profound sense of unease. The air in the house felt heavy, thick, with an unspoken presence. The mark on my arm pulsed with an insistent ache, a warning. Elias was already awake, standing by the window, his face grim. "They're active," he said, his voice low. "A new breach, far from here, but strong." He showed me a faded hand-drawn map. A small town in the Pacific Northwest, nestled deep in a rainforest, marked with a symbol that pulsed faintly, mirroring the ache in my arm. The guardian there, he's old and weak. He needs help. "You want me to go?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Elias looked at me, his eyes holding a deep, ancient wisdom. "You are strong, Michael. You have the mark, you have the training, and you are needed." The journey to the Pacific Northwest was different from my previous drives. This time I wasn't running from something. I was running to something, to a fight, to a responsibility. The landscape changed from dry desert to lush green forests, the air growing thick with humidity and the scent of damp earth. The constant rain, a soft, persistent drizzle, was a chilling reminder of the entity's primary conduit. The town was small, isolated, shrouded in a perpetual mist that clung to the ancient trees. It felt ancient, forgotten, a place where time moved slowly, where secrets lingered in the shadows. The air was heavy, thick with an unspoken presence, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. I found the guardian's house on the edge of town, a small dilapidated cabin, hidden deep within the forest. The front door was ajar, creaking softly in the wind. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The cabin was dark, filled with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. The guardian, an old man with a gaunt face and haunted eyes, lay on the floor, his body racked with tremors. He clutched an amulet in his hand, its surface dull and lifeless. His arm, exposed by a torn sleeve, bore a faded ancient version of the mark, its bluish lines almost indistinguishable from his wrinkled skin. "He's here." The old man rasped, his voice weak, his eyes wide with terror. "The water. It's rising." I looked around the cabin. The floor was damp, and a thin layer of mist swirled around my feet, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of chlorine. The windows were fogged over, obscuring the outside world. And then I heard it. The sound of dripping water coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The veil. It's tearing." The old man whispered, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "He's trying to pull it all in, to drown our world." Suddenly the dripping intensified, turning into a steady stream, then a torrent. Water began to pour from the ceiling, from the walls, from the floorboards, filling the cabin with a chilling speed. The mist thickened, swirling faster, and I could see tall, thin shadows moving within it, their forms indistinct, their movements disjointed. The old man let out a choked gasp, his body convulsing. His eyes rolled back in his head, and his grip on the amulet loosened. "No," I screamed, grabbing the amulet from his hand. It was cold, almost lifeless. I clutched it in my own hand along with the one Elias had given me, and focused my mind, remembering the chants, the symbols, the protective barriers. I began to chant, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger, more confident. The amulets in my hands hummed, vibrating with a powerful force. The mist around me wavered, and the shadows recoiled, their forms flickering. The water in the cabin continued to rise, reaching my knees, then my waist. It was black and oily, carrying the faint metallic smell of blood. And in its depths, I could see faint bluish lines swirling and shifting like ancient symbols drawn in liquid. From the swirling water, a figure began to emerge. It was massive, grotesque, its form shifting and contorting, a mass of pale, decaying flesh, and long, sinuous limbs. Its head was indistinct, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and hungry. It was the source, the one pulling the strings, the one tearing the veil. It let out a low, guttural roar, a sound that shook the very foundations of the cabin, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. The water surged, pushing me back, threatening to engulf me. I gritted my teeth, pushing through the fear, pushing through the pain, my chant growing louder, more defiant. The mark on my arm burned a searing pain that radiated through my entire body. The amulets glowed brightly, casting a blinding light that pushed back the darkness, pushed back the monstrous figure. The creature roared again, a sound of pure rage and frustration. It lunged forward, its massive clawed hand reaching for me, for the amulets, for the mark on my arm. I closed my eyes, focusing all my energy, all my will into the chant, into the protective barrier. I wouldn't break. I wouldn't let it through. Then a sudden blinding flash of light erupted from the amulets. A wave of pure energy surged outward, pushing back the water, pushing back the monstrous figure. The roar faltered, then faded. The water receded, sinking back into the floorboards, into the walls, into the ceiling, leaving behind only dampness and the lingering smell of chlorine and blood. When the light faded, the cabin was silent. The water was gone. The monstrous figure was gone. The old guardian lay still on the floor, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. I knelt beside him, my body trembling, my arm throbbing with pain. The bluish lines on my skin pulsed faintly, a dull ache radiating from them. I had pushed it back, but the cost was clear. The old guardian was fading, and I was alone. I looked out the window. The mist still clung to the ancient trees, and the rain continued to fall, a soft, persistent drizzle. The world outside seemed normal, oblivious to the battle that had just taken place within the small cabin. I knew then that this was my life now, a constant vigil. A never-ending fight against an unseen enemy. The veil was thin, and they were always pushing, always trying to break through. And I, Michael, the former college student who just needed a summer job, was now one of the few standing between them and our world. The burden was heavy, the fear constant, but there was also a grim determination. I would not let them through, not while I still breathed. The fight for our world had just begun, and I was ready for whatever came next. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate aftermath of the previous part, focusing on the protagonist's exhaustion, the fate of the old guardian, and the lingering sense of dread. Introduce a period of isolation and self-reliance, forcing the protagonist to fully embrace their role as a guardian without direct mentorship. Develop a new, more personal form of entity manifestation that targets the protagonist's emotional vulnerabilities and past traumas, blurring the lines between their personal life and their guardian duties. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their attempts to cope with the psychological warfare, and the erosion of their sense of self. Build towards a climactic moment of a profound personal sacrifice, or a chilling revelation about the entity's ability to exploit human weakness, leaving the reader with a profound sense of inescapable dread and the heavy burden of their new reality. The old guardian, his breath shallow and ragged, faded with the dawn. I sat beside him, holding his hand, feeling the last flicker of life leave his frail body. The mark on his arm, once a vibrant blue, had turned a dull, lifeless gray. When he was gone, the cabin felt emptier, colder, despite the lingering humidity from the receding water. I was alone. Truly alone. I spent the next few days in a haze of grief and exhaustion. I buried the old guardian beneath a gnarled cedar tree behind his cabin, marking the spot with a simple cairn of stones. The rain continued to fall, a soft, persistent drizzle that seemed to mourn with me. The cabin, once a place of refuge, now felt like a tomb. With Elias so far away and John unreachable, I was on my own. I had to rely on my training, on the instincts Elias had painstakingly cultivated within me. I cleaned the cabin, clearing away the dampness and the lingering smell of chlorine and blood. I studied the old guardian's journals filled with cryptic notes and faded drawings, trying to decipher his experiences, his knowledge. The mark on my arm pulsed a constant dull ache, a living connection to the veil, to the entities, to the endless fight. The entities, however, were not done with me. They had been pushed back but not defeated. And now, without the old guardian's presence, without Elias's direct guidance, they became more insidious, more personal. The physical manifestations were rare, almost non-existent. Instead, they targeted my mind, my memories, my deepest fears. They began to twist my perception of reality, blurring the lines between what was real and what was an illusion. I would be sitting by the fire reading an old journal when I would hear my mother's voice clear as day calling my name from the next room. I would get up, my heart pounding, and search the empty cabin only to find nothing. Then the whispers would start soft and seductive, promising me a return to normalcy, a life free from fear, if only I would let go. They brought back memories I had tried to bury. Drew his face pale and lifeless in the blue locker. The terrified screams of the children at Sunset Cove. The chilling laughter from Lake Dolores. They replayed these moments in my mind, vivid and visceral, twisting them, amplifying the horror, making me relive every agonizing second. One evening, as the rain lashed against the cabin windows, I was trying to sleep, but the whispers were relentless. They were calling my name, promising me peace, promising me an end to the fear. I clutched the amulet, chanting the protective words Elias had taught me, but my mind was weary, my resolve fraying. Then the whispers changed. They became John's voice. Michael, he whispered, his voice raspy, tired, but undeniably real. I'm sorry. I couldn't get to you. They got me. They pulled me in. My heart pounded against my ribs. No, it couldn't be. John was a guardian. He was strong. It's too late for me, Michael. John's voice continued, filled with despair. But you can still save yourself. Just let go. Embrace the water. It's not so bad. It's peaceful here. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting against the illusion, fighting against the despair that threatened to engulf me. This wasn't John. This was them, trying to break me. But the voice was so real, so convincing. I could almost feel his presence beside me, cold and wet. You're alone, Michael. The voice whispered, now tinged with a chilling glee. No one can help you now. Elias is too far, and I'm gone. You're next. A wave of profound loneliness and despair washed over me. They were right. I was alone, and I was tired. So incredibly tired. The thought of just letting go, of succumbing to the water, of finding peace in the darkness, was almost tempting. The mark on my arm burned, a searing pain that radiated through my entire body, a desperate warning. I gritted my teeth, pushing through the pain, pushing through the despair. I wouldn't break. Not now. Not ever. I opened my eyes. The cabin was still dark, the rain still lashed against the windows. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I was still here, still fighting, but the encounter left a deep scar. The line between reality and illusion had blurred even further. I started to doubt everything. Was Elias real? Was John still alive? Or were they just elaborate illusions designed to give me false hope, to make me drop my guard? I became even more isolated, more withdrawn. I rarely left the cabin, fearing what I might encounter in the mist-shrouded forest. I ate sparingly, slept little, my days and nights a constant vigil against the unseen. The only comfort was the hum of the amulets, the familiar weight of the old journals, the rhythmic cadence of the chants. One afternoon, as I was studying an ancient map, tracing the faint lines of other thin places, I noticed something new. A small, almost imperceptible symbol hidden within the intricate patterns of the map. It was a symbol I hadn't seen before, but it resonated with the mark on my arm, sending a faint tremor through my skin. I looked closer. The symbol was located in a remote, uninhabited region of the Amazon rainforest, far from any known human settlement. It was surrounded by other familiar symbols, marking known thin places, but this one was different. It pulsed faintly, a dull, insistent ache mirroring the ache in my arm. It wasn't a breach, it was something else, something growing. As I stared at the map, the air in the cabin grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. The temperature dropped, and the faint smell of chlorine and something metallic sweet filled the air. The mark on my arm burned, a searing pain that radiated through my entire body. Then a new sound. Not a whisper, not a gurgle, but a low rhythmic thrumming vibrating through the floor, through the very air. It was coming from the map itself. The symbols on the map began to glow faintly, pulsing with a dull bluish light. The new symbol, the one in the Amazon, pulsed brighter, faster, its light intensifying. And then from the center of the map, a thin, ethereal mist began to rise, swirling and shifting, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of chlorine and something metallic, faintly sweet. Through the swirling mist, I saw them. Not the familiar shadows, not the pale man, not the child figure. These were different, more ancient, more powerful. Their forms were vast, indistinct, shifting and contorting like mountains of water given malevolent life. Their eyes, though unseen, felt like black holes sucking all light, all hope into their depths. They were not trying to lure me. They were not trying to break me. They were simply observing and growing. The thrumming intensified, shaking the cabin, rattling the windows. The mist thickened, swirling faster, engulfing the map, engulfing the table, engulfing me. The mark on my arm burned a searing pain that threatened to consume me. I knew then that this was not a test. This was a revelation. They were not just trying to breach the veil. They were trying to become the veil, to merge with our world, to drown it in their own. I clutched the amulets, my hands trembling, and focused all my energy, all my will into the chance, into the protective barriers. I wouldn't let them. Not while I still breathed. The cabin was filled with the sound of the thrumming, the swirling mist, the overwhelming smell of chlorine and blood. I stood there alone, a single thread against an unraveling tapestry, a lone guardian against an ancient, hungry tide. The fight for our world had just begun, and I knew with a chilling certainty that it would be a fight to the death. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate aftermath of the previous part, focusing on the protagonist's profound realization and the overwhelming scale of the threat. Introduce a desperate search for answers and allies, pushing the protagonist beyond their current isolated existence. Develop a series of escalating physical and psychological challenges as the protagonist ventures into new, dangerous, thin places, or encounters new manifestations. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their growing understanding of the entity's true nature and ultimate goal, and the sacrifices required to confront them. Build towards a climactic moment of a direct confrontation with a powerful entity, or a chilling discovery that reveals the true stakes of the conflict, leaving the reader with a profound sense of inescapable dread and the heavy burden of their new reality. The vision of the Amazon, the vast shifting forms, the thrumming that shook the very foundations of the cabin. It was burned into my mind. They weren't just trying to breach the veil, they were trying to become it, to drown our world in their own. The realization was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, a terror far deeper than any individual encounter. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about everything. The mark on my arm pulsed with a dull, insistent ache, a constant reminder of the growing threat. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, a temporary reprieve from an inevitable tide. I couldn't stay here waiting for them to find another weak point, another guardian to overwhelm. I had to act. I spent days poring over the old Guardian's journals, cross-referencing them with Elias's maps, searching for any clue, any hint of how to fight something so vast, so ancient. The journals spoke of the Great Drowning, a time when the veil had almost completely collapsed, when their world had nearly consumed ours. They spoke of desperate rituals, of forgotten guardians, of sacrifices made to push back the tide. But there was no clear answer, no single weapon, no easy solution. The whispers intensified, no longer just calling my name, but weaving intricate narratives of despair, of futility. They showed me visions of a world consumed by black water, of humanity dissolving into formless echoes. They tried to convince me that resistance was pointless, that surrender was the only path to peace. But the image of the Amazon, the sheer scale of their ambition, fueled a grim determination within me. I wouldn't let them win. I knew I needed help. I needed John. I needed Elias. I needed the network. But how to reach them? The old Guardian's journals hinted at ancient communication methods, rituals that could bridge the vast distances between Guardians, but they were cryptic, incomplete. One night, as the rain lashed against the cabin windows, I found a small leather-bound book hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was old, its pages brittle and yellowed, filled with strange symbols and diagrams. It was a book of rituals, a guide to the ancient ways of the Guardians. And within its pages, I found it a ritual for communication, a way to send a message across the veil to reach another Guardian. The ritual was complex, requiring specific herbs, a precise arrangement of stones, and a long, intricate chant. It also required a personal sacrifice, a drop of blood imbued with the power of the mark. It was risky. It could draw their attention. But I had no other choice. I gathered the necessary components, my hands trembling. As I performed the ritual, the air in the cabin grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. The mark on my arm burned a searing pain that radiated through my entire body. The mist began to rise from the floor, swirling and shifting, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of chlorine and something metallic, faintly sweet. I chanted, my voice trembling but firm, focusing all my energy, all my will into the words. I pricked my finger, and a single drop of blood, dark and shimmering with a faint blue light, fell onto the central stone. The stone pulsed a dull, insistent ache, mirroring the ache in my arm. The mist thickened, swirling faster, and I could see tall, thin shadows moving within it, their forms indistinct, their movements disjointed. They were drawn by the ritual, by the opening in the veil. They were curious and hungry. Suddenly, a new sound erupted from the mist. Not a whisper, not a gurgle, but a chorus of familiar voices overlapping, echoing through the cabin. John's voice, Elias's voice, the old guardian's voice, all calling my name, all speaking in unison. Their words distorted, twisted, filled with a chilling glee. "You're opening the door, Michael," John's voice whispered right beside my ear. "You're inviting us in. Join us," Elias's voice hissed, cold and ancient. "Become one with the water. It's too late." The old guardian's voice groaned, filled with despair. "The tapestry is unraveling." I gritted my teeth, fighting against the illusion, fighting against the despair that threatened to engulf me. This wasn't them. This was their trick, their attempt to break my resolve. The mark on my arm burned, a searing pain that threatened to consume me. The mist surged forward, engulfing me, pressing in on me from all sides. I felt cold, wet hands grasping at me, pulling at my clothes, trying to drag me down. I focused on the ritual, on the message I needed to send. I pushed through the pain, through the fear, my chant growing louder, more defiant. The amulets in my hands glowed brightly, casting a blinding light that pushed back the mist, pushed back the grasping hands. Then a sudden, blinding flash of light erupted from the central stone. A wave of pure energy surged outward, pushing back the mist, pushing back the shadows, pushing back the voices. The cabin was filled with a deafening silence, broken only by my own ragged breathing. When the light faded, the mist was gone. The shadows were gone. The voices were gone. The stone in the center of the ritual circle pulsed faintly, its blue light fading. I had sent the message. But at what cost? I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling, drenched in sweat. The mark on my arm throbbed, a dull ache radiating from it, but the bluish lines were no longer glowing. I had made contact, but I had also drawn their attention. Days turned into a week. No response, no sign that my message had been received. The silence was more terrifying than any scream. Had I failed? Had I risked everything for nothing? Then one morning, I woke up to a faint hum. Not the hum of the amulets, but a different kind of vibration coming from beneath the floorboards. I got up, my heart pounding, and pulled back the loose floorboard where the old guardian had hidden his book. Beneath it, nestled in the damp earth, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It wasn't there before. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was old, its surface smooth and worn, covered with symbols similar to the ones on my arm. I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried herbs, was a single polished stone. It was dark, almost black, but as I picked it up, a faint, bluish light pulsed from its depths, mirroring the mark on my arm. And then a voice clear and strong echoed in my mind. Not a whisper, not an illusion, but a direct thought, a connection. "Michael, we received your message. The tapestry is indeed unraveling. We are coming." It was John's voice, and it was real. A wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. I wasn't alone. The network was real, and they were coming. But the relief was short-lived. As John's voice faded, a new image flashed in my mind. A vast, dark ocean stretching out to an endless horizon. The sky above, a swirling vortex of dark clouds, illuminated by flashes of lightning that revealed glimpses of towering skeletal structures rising from the depths. And in the center of it all, a single massive eye, milky white and unblinking, fixed on me. It was the source, the one pulling the strings, the one tearing the veil, and it knew I was coming. The stone in my hand pulsed, a dull, insistent ache. The fight for our world had just begun, and I knew with a chilling certainty that it would be a fight to the death, and I was ready. Step-by-step plan. Establish the protagonist's renewed sense of purpose, and the immediate preparations for the journey, focusing on the psychological impact of the impending confrontation. Introduce the journey to the central gathering point, detailing the challenges and subtle manifestations encountered along the way, emphasizing the pervasive nature of the threat. Develop the arrival at the gathering point, introducing other guardians and the initial sense of camaraderie, mixed with underlying tension and fear. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their growing understanding of the collective burden, and the chilling revelations shared by the other guardians about the entity's true power and ultimate goal. Build towards a climactic moment of a strategic briefing or a chilling premonition that sets the stage for the final confrontation, leaving the reader with a profound sense of inescapable dread and the heavy burden of their shared reality. John's voice, clear and strong in my mind, was a lifeline. "Michael, we received your message. The tapestry is indeed unraveling. We are coming." The stone in my hand, warm and pulsing with a faint blue light, was proof. I wasn't alone. The network was real, and they were coming. The image of the vast dark ocean, the skeletal structures, the single unblinking eye. It lingered, a chilling premonition of the true enemy. This wasn't just about containing breaches anymore. This was about a war. And I, Michael, the former college student, was now a soldier in a fight for existence. A new sense of purpose, grim but resolute, settled over me. I spent the next few days preparing. I packed the old Guardian's journals, Elias's maps, and the small leather-bound book of rituals. I gathered all the amulets I could find in the cabin, their surfaces dull but humming with a faint latent power. I sharpened the old Guardian's hunting knife, its blade glinting in the dim light, a tangible weapon against an intangible foe. The whispers still came more frantic now, more desperate. They tried to sow doubt, to instill fear, to convince me that my allies were illusions, that my journey was futile. But John's voice, Elias's voice, the clear, undeniable connection through the stone drowned them out. I was no longer just listening to them. I was actively pushing them back, my mind a fortress against their insidious influence. The mark on my arm pulsed a constant dull ache, but it also felt like a source of strength, a direct link to the power I now wielded. A new message came through the stone, a series of coordinates, a remote location deep in the Rocky Mountains. The gathering point, John's voice echoed in my mind. "Come, we wait." The journey was long, arduous, a stark contrast to my previous desperate flights. This time I was moving with purpose, driven by a grim determination. The landscape shifted from the damp, mist-shrouded forests of the Pacific Northwest to the towering, snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. The air grew thin and cold, the silence of the mountains, a stark contrast to the constant hum of the entity's presence. Even here in the heart of the mountains, their influence was felt. The streams I crossed seemed to run too fast, their waters too dark. The lakes I passed seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light, their depths hinting at unseen horrors. The whispers followed me, carried on the wind, echoing off the ancient rock faces, trying to lure me off the path into the hidden crevices, into the icy depths. But I held the stone, focused on the coordinates, and pushed forward. After days of relentless driving and hiking, I finally reached the coordinates. It was a hidden valley, nestled between towering peaks, accessible only by a narrow, winding trail. In the center of the valley, a small, isolated lodge stood, its windows dark, its chimney cold. It looked abandoned, forgotten. But as I approached, I felt a familiar hum, a resonance that mirrored the mark on my arm. This was it. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The lodge was dimly lit by a few flickering lanterns, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and something else. Something ancient and powerful, like charged electricity. Around a large, rough-hewn table, a dozen figures sat, their faces etched with weariness, their eyes holding a deep, ancient wisdom. They were diverse, old and young men and women from different corners of the world. Each bore a faint bluish mark on their arm, a silent testament to their shared burden. They were the Guardians, the threads of the tapestry. John was there, his face gaunt, his eyes shadowed, but a flicker of recognition, of relief, crossed his features when he saw me. Elias was there too, looking older, more tired, but his eyes still held that sharp, clear gaze. "Michael," John said, his voice raspy, but a genuine smile touched his lips. "You made it." I nodded, a wave of profound relief washing over me. I wasn't alone, not anymore. We sat around the table, sharing stories, sharing knowledge. Each Guardian recounted their own battles, their own struggles against the entities. They spoke of new manifestations, new tactics, new breaches. The scale of the threat, the sheer number of thin places, the relentless pressure on the veil. It was overwhelming. A woman from a remote village in the Himalayas spoke of ancient glaciers melting, releasing something dark and hungry from beneath the ice. A man from the Australian outback described underground rivers turning black, their waters teeming with unseen horrors. A young woman from a bustling city spoke of the entities manifesting in the reflections of skyscrapers and the condensation on subway windows, in the very moisture of the air. The entities were adapting. They were learning. They were everywhere. Elias, his voice grim, explained the true nature of the threat. They are not just trying to breach the veil, Michael. They are trying to become it, to merge with our world, to drown it in their own. The great drowning is upon us. He showed us a new map, not of our world, but of theirs. A vast, dark ocean stretching out to an endless horizon filled with towering skeletal structures. And in the center, a single massive eye, milky white and unblinking, fixed on us. This is their core. Elias said, his voice low and grave. Their heart, their consciousness. It is growing, and it is reaching out, trying to pull our world into its depths. John, his face grim, added, we believe it's trying to manifest, to fully cross over. And if it does, it will be the end of everything. A chilling silence fell over the room. The weight of their words, the sheer scale of the impending catastrophe was crushing. We were a handful of guardians scattered across the globe fighting an ancient, powerful enemy that sought to consume all reality. So what do? I asked, my voice hoarse. Elias looked at me, his eyes holding a deep, ancient wisdom. We fight. We push them back. We strengthen the veil. And we find a way to sever their connection to our world. To cut off the head of the beast. He unrolled another map, this one of our world, but marked with a single pulsing red X. It was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a remote, uninhabited island far from any known landmass. This is where it will manifest, Elias said, his voice grim. The strongest thin place on Earth, the point of no return. John nodded. We have a window, a short time before the manifestation is complete. We need to go there, to stop it. The room was filled with a tense silence. The air crackled with unspoken fear, with grim determination. We were guardians. We were the last line of defense, and the fate of our world rested on our shoulders. I looked at the other guardians, their faces etched with weariness, but their eyes holding a flicker of defiance. We were threads, yes, but together we were a tapestry, and we would not unravel, not without a fight. The mark on my arm pulsed a dull ache, but also a surge of power. I was ready. We were ready. The final battle was about to begin, and I knew with a chilling certainty that not all of us would make it back. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate preparations for the final mission, focusing on the tension and the gravity of the impending confrontation. Detail the journey to the remote island, emphasizing the escalating supernatural phenomena and the psychological toll on the Guardians. Develop the arrival at the island, describing the chilling atmosphere and the initial signs of the entity's manifestation. Focus on the Guardians' collective efforts, their individual struggles, and the terrifying power of the entity as it actively tries to break their resolve and consume them. Build towards a climactic moment of direct confrontation, a desperate act of defiance, or a chilling revelation about the entity's true form and its connection to the Guardians, leaving the reader with a profound sense of inescapable dread and the ultimate sacrifice required. The map of our world, with its single pulsing red X in the middle of the Pacific, was a stark reminder of the impossible task ahead. Elias's words echoed in the tense silence of the lodge. The strongest thin place on Earth, the point of no return. John's grim nod confirmed it. This was it, the final battle. Preparations were swift, grim, and efficient. We gathered what little supplies we had, more amulets, ancient herbs, vials of consecrated water, and a few practical tools. There was no time for elaborate plans, no room for doubt. We were a small, desperate force facing an ancient cosmic horror. The journey to the remote island was a descent into madness. We traveled by various means, a small group of us, each guardian using their own resources to reach the designated rendezvous point. I flew on a series of small, rickety planes, then boarded a fishing trawler that smelled of salt and decay. The ocean was vast, indifferent, its surface, a shimmering mirror that seemed to hold countless unseen horrors. The further we sailed, the more the ocean changed. The water grew darker, almost black, its surface unnaturally still, reflecting the perpetually overcast sky. The air grew heavy, thick, with the familiar smell of chlorine, and something metallic, faintly sweet like old blood. The whispers returned, more insistent now, more seductive, promising peace. Promising an end to the fear, if only I would embrace the water. But I held the stone focused on the coordinates and pushed them back. The mark on my arm pulsed with a constant dull ache, a living compass guiding me towards the heart of the drowning. It burned with a searing pain whenever the entity's influence grew stronger, a constant reminder of the impending confrontation. After days of relentless travel, the island finally appeared on the horizon. It was a jagged volcanic peak shrouded in a perpetual mist that clung to its ancient black rock. No trees, no vegetation, just a desolate, inhospitable landscape. And from its center, a faint, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the air, through the very hull of the boat, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. As we approached, the mist around the island thickened, swirling faster, revealing glimpses of towering skeletal structures rising from the depths of the ocean surrounding the island, like a monstrous crown. They were vast, indistinct, shifting and contorting like mountains of water given malevolent life. And in the center of it all, a single massive eye, milky white and unblinking, fixed on us. It was the source, the one pulling the strings, the one tearing the veil, and it was almost fully manifested. The fishing trawler shuddered, its engine sputtering as if the very air was resisting our approach. The water around us began to churn, forming massive black whirlpools that threatened to drag us into the depths. The whispers intensified, turning into a chorus of desperate, pleading voices, then into a cacophony of chilling laughter echoing off the skeletal structures, a symphony of unseen joy and malevolence. "This is it," John said, his voice grim, his hand clutching an amulet. "The veil is almost gone." We disembarked onto the black volcanic rock, the ground trembling beneath our feet. The air was thick with the smell of chlorine and blood, and the rhythmic thrumming vibrated through my entire body, a constant, oppressive presence. The mist swirled around us, thick and suffocating, revealing glimpses of the towering skeletal structures, their forms shifting and contorting like living things. The other guardians were already there, a small, determined group, their faces grim, their eyes holding a flicker of defiance. We were a handful of threads standing against an unraveling tapestry, a lone bastion against an ancient, hungry tide. Elias, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes burning with a fierce resolve, stood at the forefront. "The ritual," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the thrumming. "We must perform the ritual. To sever the connection, to push it back." He unrolled a large, intricately drawn diagram on the black rock, its symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. It was a complex ritual requiring the combined power of all the guardians, a desperate act of defiance against an overwhelming force. As we began the ritual, the entity responded. The thrumming intensified, shaking the island, rattling the very air. The skeletal structures around us began to move their massive forms, shifting and contorting, reaching out with long, sinuous limbs, trying to crush us, to pull us into the depths. The mist surged forward, engulfing us, pressing in on us from all sides. The whispers became screams, a chorus of tormented voices echoing in our minds, trying to break our resolve, to drive us mad. They showed us visions of our deepest fears, our greatest regrets, our loved ones drowning in black water, their faces distorted by terror. I fought against it, my mind screaming, my body trembling. I focused on the chant on the amulets on the protective barrier. The mark on my arm burned a searing pain that threatened to consume me, but it also pulsed with a fierce protective energy, a direct link to the power I now wielded. One by one, the guardians began to falter. Their chants grew weak, their bodies racked with tremors. Some collapsed, their eyes wide with terror, their minds overwhelmed by the entity's assault. The skeletal structures pressed closer, their massive forms casting long, terrifying shadows over us. John, his face grim, his body trembling, stood beside me, his voice hoarse but defiant. "Keep chanting, Michael, don't stop." Elias, his face pale and drawn, his body swaying, continued the ritual, his voice a desperate whisper against the overwhelming roar of the entity. He was pouring all his energy, all his life force into the ritual, into the desperate attempt to sever the connection. Suddenly, the ground beneath us cracked a massive fissure opening in the black rock, spewing forth a torrent of black oily water. It was the entity's blood, its essence, and it was trying to consume us. The water surged forward, engulfing the fallen guardians, pulling them into its depths. Their screams were cut short, replaced by a chilling silence. I looked at John, his face grim, his eyes filled with a desperate resolve. He nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. This was it. The final sacrifice. We poured all our remaining energy, all our will, into the ritual, into the amulets, into the mark on our arms. The bluish lines on our skin glowed brightly, pulsing with a fierce, blinding light. The amulets hummed, vibrating with a powerful force. The entity roared, a sound of pure rage and frustration, as if it sensed our desperate act, our final defiance. The skeletal structures writhed, their massive forms thrashing in the black water, trying to crush us, to stop us. Then a sudden blinding flash of light erupted from the ritual circle. A wave of pure energy so powerful it shook the very foundations of the island, surged outward, pushing back the black water, pushing back the skeletal structures, pushing back the entity itself. The roar faltered, then faded. The black water receded, sinking back into the earth, leaving behind only dampness and the lingering smell of chlorine and blood. The skeletal structures wavered, their forms flickering. Then slowly, reluctantly, they began to dissolve, fading back into the mist, back into their own dimension. When the light faded, the island was silent. The mist still clung to the black rock, but the air was clear. The oppressive presence gone. The entity was gone. The veil was intact, but the cost was clear. Elias lay on the ground, his body still, his face peaceful. The mark on his arm had faded completely, leaving only pale, wrinkled skin. He had given everything. John stood beside me, his body trembling, his face pale, but his eyes held a flicker of triumph. He looked at his arm, at the mark, its bluish lines still glowing faintly. Then he looked at mine. The bluish lines on my arm pulsed, a dull ache radiating from them, but they were still there, still vibrant, still. We were the last ones standing, the last threads of the tapestry. I looked out at the vast, empty ocean, the sky still overcast, but a faint glimmer of light breaking through the clouds. We had won, for now. But the victory felt hollow, tinged with the bitter taste of loss. The fight was far from over. The entities were still out there, still hungry, still waiting. And I, Michael, the former college student, was now a guardian, a keeper of the veil, a lone warrior in a never-ending war. The burden was heavy, the fear constant, but there was also a grim determination. I would not let them through, not while I still breathed. The fight for our world had just begun, and I knew with a chilling certainty that it would be a fight I would wage until my last breath. Step-by-step plan. Establish the immediate aftermath of the final battle, focusing on the protagonist's physical and emotional exhaustion, and the profound sense of loss. Detail the return journey, emphasizing the lingering psychological effects of the confrontation and the new unsettling quietness of the world. Introduce a period of solitary vigilance, forcing the protagonist to adapt to a life without direct allies, constantly aware of the subtle signs of the entity's continued presence. Focus on the protagonist's internal struggle, their attempts to find a new normal, and the chilling realization that the victory was merely a temporary reprieve, not an end. Build towards a climactic moment of a new subtle manifestation that confirms the entity's enduring threat and the protagonist's inescapable burden, leaving the reader with a profound sense of lingering dread and the heavy weight of their solitary, endless war. The silence on the island was deafening, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the black rock and the ragged sound of my own breathing. Elias lay still, his face peaceful, his sacrifice complete. John stood beside me, his body trembling, his face pale, but his eyes held a flicker of grim triumph. We were the last ones, the last threads of the tapestry. The mark on my arm pulsed a dull ache, but it also felt like a living connection, a testament to the power we had wielded, the impossible battle we had won. For now, the journey back was a blur of exhaustion and profound grief. We left the island a desolate monument to our victory and our loss, and sailed back across the vast, indifferent ocean. The water, though no longer black and churning, still felt heavy, pregnant with unseen horrors. The sky, though no longer a swirling vortex, remained perpetually overcast, a gray shroud over a world that felt irrevocably changed. The whispers were gone, replaced by an unsettling quietness. It was a silence that felt heavier than any noise, a void that seemed to hum with a latent, unseen presence. It was the silence of a predator waiting. We parted ways at the nearest port, a silent understanding passing between us. John, his face etched with weariness, but his eyes holding a deep, ancient resolve, simply nodded. "The fight continues, Michael." He rasped, his voice hoarse. "Always." He disappeared into the bustling crowd, a lone shadow against the indifferent world. I returned to Elias's cabin in the Arizona desert. The journey was a solitary one, each mile a stark reminder of the emptiness that now surrounded me. The cabin, once a place of learning and camaraderie, now felt vast and hollow. The scent of cedar and ancient herbs still lingered, but it was tinged with the faint metallic smell of old blood, a constant reminder of the sacrifices made. My days became a solitary vigil. I continued to study the old journals, the ancient maps, the cryptic rituals. I practiced the chants, the hand gestures, the breathing techniques, honing my skills, strengthening my mind. The mark on my arm pulsed, a constant companion, a living barometer of the Vale's stability. The entities, though pushed back, were not gone. Their influence was subtle, now insidious. The whispers returned, faint at first, then growing clearer, weaving intricate narratives of despair, of futility. They tried to convince me that my victory was meaningless, that the great drowning was inevitable, that I was merely delaying the inevitable. I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard the sound of dripping water, only to find everything dry. The air in the cabin would sometimes grow heavy, thick, with an unspoken presence, a sudden, unnatural chill that raised goosebumps on my arms. I would see fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision, gone when I turned to look. These were not direct attacks, but constant reminders, psychological warfare designed to erode my sanity, to break my resolve. The world outside the cabin felt different too. The news reports spoke of unusual weather patterns, of sudden, inexplicable floods in arid regions, of strange currents in the oceans. I knew it was them, testing the boundaries, pushing the veil. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and purple, I sat on the porch watching the vast empty landscape. The air was still and dry, carrying the faint scent of dust and mesquite. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. Then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched giggle carried on the wind. It was playful, innocent, but it sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I froze, my eyes darting, searching the vast, empty landscape. Nothing. Just the endless desert stretching out to the horizon. The giggle came again, closer this time, swirling around me, a chorus of unseen joy. It sounded like dozens of children, their voices overlapping, echoing through the silent desert. I stood up, my heart pounding, my eyes wide with terror. There were no children here, no water, no place for them to hide. The mark on my arm burned, a searing pain that radiated through my entire body. The air around me grew heavy, thick, with an unspoken presence. And then from the dry, cracked earth of the desert floor, a faint mist began to rise. It was thin, ethereal, swirling and shifting, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of chlorine, and something metallic, faintly sweet. Through the swirling mist I saw them. Not the towering, monstrous forms of the core entity, but the familiar, gaunt shadows sliding silently between the mesquite trees. They moved in a strange, disjointed way, leaving no footprints on the dry earth. Their forms were indistinct, shimmering slightly like heat haze over asphalt. The giggling intensified, turning into a chorus of delighted, chilling laughter. And then from the thickest part of the mist, a figure began to emerge. It was a child, small and indistinct, its form shimmering slightly. It was looking directly at me. And then slowly, it raised its hand and waved. My blood ran cold. It was the child figure from Lake Dolores. And it was here, in the middle of the desert, again. I stood frozen, my hand twitching, a primal urge to respond, to acknowledge. But Elias's words, John's warnings, echoed in my mind. I wouldn't. I couldn't. The child figure took a step forward, then another, slowly, deliberately, its arms still raised, still waving. It was coming for me. Its eyes, though indistinct, seemed to bore into me, expectant, waiting for my response. I raised my amulet, clutched it in my hand, and began to chant, my voice trembling but firm. The amulet hummed, a faint vibration against my palm. The mist around me wavered, and the shadows recoiled, their forms flickering. The child figure stopped a few feet away. its form shimmering, its presence growing stronger, colder. The air around it dropped several degrees, and I could see my breath. It tilted its head as if confused, then let out a frustrated, inhuman shriek. At the same moment, the mist began to recede slowly, imperceptibly at first, then faster. The shadows backed away, retreating into the fading mist. The giggling faded, replaced by the silence of the desert night. By the time the mist was completely gone, the desert was still and empty, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, breathing heavily, my body trembling. They were still here, still trying, still waiting. The victory on the island had been a reprieve, not an end. The tapestry was still fraying, thread by thread. I looked at the mark on my arm, its bluish lines, a permanent part of me. It was a burden, a constant reminder of the unseen war. But it was also a source of strength, a connection to the power I now wielded. I was a guardian, a lone thread in a vast, unraveling tapestry. And I knew with a chilling certainty that my fight for our world was far from over. It was a solitary, endless war, fought in the shadows against an enemy that always found its way. And I would fight until my last breath.